Welcome to the Curious Podcast. I'm your host, Damian, and in this episode, we're going to be doing a State of the Union address, so to speak. Um, I, as a journalist, have seen and some of my connections that I have kind of shown me that there is actually becoming a little bit more of like an increase in some tensions and extremism that I'm starting to see. So, what was originally going to be something that I was going to cover in like Black History Month is like a history of America, perspectives from all sides kind of video. I'm actually deciding to do as a closing of the year history of how we got to where we are today. So you're going to see this is going to be the State of the Union from the whole of the Union and how it's affecting today and what the state is currently. But as of right now, when it comes to the things that I'm covering, I do want to let you know that this is coming from the perspective of somebody who is very emotionally removed in the sense that I'm looking at this through the lens of a journalist. So I'm taking the information, I'm not really putting too much, like I don't have hate in my heart. I don't have some need to try to condemn anybody or any of that nature. I'm just trying to put all the facts out as clearly and honestly as possible in the most honest form of reporting on the American experience that I can, in the hope that maybe some people who are closed-minded will actually begin to open their eyes to see certain realities that they ignite or denied in the past, as well as for those who don't understand why the masses are so content with certain things going on in the world or in America. This will give more perspective, and it's not about good or bad in the sense of the masses, because a lot of this, unfortunately, is the propaganda merchants and people who I would call the people who pour the Kool-Aid. So there's a lot of people who bought into, who drank the Kool-Aid for a lot of things that are just genuinely not true. And before I go straight to condemning, I do want to give the chance to see if once they know that there's poison in the Kool-Aid, do they put the glass down and try to tell and help the others, essentially? Or are they, trying to pass the cup off to the next man? So the perspective that I would like to begin with is to kind of cover all the different viewpoints and how people got to them, like the good and the bad, from the point of Americans. So it's going to start with the white liberal, the black liberal, the white conservative, and the black conservative. And then the same thing for the different minority groups. I'm going to kind of put the minorities into one big cluster, but I'll explain each one separately as I'm going through them. So to kind of get started, what I really would like to do is kind of cover the white liberal side, because this is a point where I would say, because of, I would argue, things such as like co-opting and the purposeful misinterpretation and overstepping of the policies that we seek to go for and the things that we actually want to have happen in the world, politicians and others seem to be making it to where the points are getting put to a point so radical and so absurdist that it kind of writes them off, and you almost stop wanting to have the progress and the move for better, to kind of get away from the status quo that we're dealing with, where corruption, where the economic inequalities that are just ridiculously apparent at this point, where the people want these changes. And I think there's some factors that are stopping that. So at first, I'm going to discuss the changes in the history of the people who kind of held those perspectives over time. And in doing that, I'm going to then discuss the negatives, how they fall for the trap that ends up making it pretty much invalid in the real world, or why certain policies are kind of not being put in the right light that they should be. And in describing the liberal and progressive, what I'm describing most is those who might have self-loathing or shame about their creed or about like what their people are doing, like from like the hatred and like the way that the policies in the global sphere and like to minorities and so on are, when it comes to like the aggressive need to try to like extract wealth and to be you know kind of everything that the American values state is wrong, right? Like be there for your fellow man, open market, try to help and provide for others, so on and so forth. So for people who are in that state, it's completely fair to be self-loathing and have that negative feeling. And I'll give the black counter to that, and when I get to that. But as of now, to give that perspective, that's one subset of the progressive that you will run into. Another is I have seen the issues that go into the world that I cannot be backing. So I let's say the Bull Connors of the past, like the politicians that would do harm and that would be so horrendous that even the apathetic kind of have to go, okay, this is too much. So not those who necessarily want equality and equal opportunity, because they do hold to that exclusivity and they do have that narcissistic like manifest destiny-esque the world should be for us and is for us mindset. But these people can still be on that side of being progressive, and that would be the definition for what you would call that wolf in sheep's clothing that has been coined for that category of person in the past from the civil rights movement and so on. They could act in good faith and just have these harsh opinions, but there's also been those who, like I described in the political party, will co-opt and intentionally sabotage these movements to either try to discredit or to eradicate the things that they're doing. So that is the self-loathing side. That is the people who are just pushing to the degree where there's no evil, genuine evil in the world, but they don't mind a little bit of bad and corruption, right? And then the last category would be the good-hearted, genuine, pure people that absolutely do exist. And that is like the abolitionists during slavery, the Quaker during segregation and the Black codes and the times after that, trying to fight to try to make the world a better place in that sense. The missionaries and the real Christians, because there's also the manipulators of that side of that coin. But the real Christians who are genuinely good-hearted and know that the God in the Bible does not say anything about anything more than to provide for thy neighbor and treat with the respect and love. You are not the judge, so on. So the people who hold genuine, pure morality that is not something that only exists for their own tribe or creed, these are the people who I think deserve the most appreciation. And to kind of go through the lens, so we've seen that in the past in those examples. In the civil rights era, it would be the celebrities that would go, I'm not going to perform if I'm not allowed to have my Black performer along with me, who fought for rights at the cost of their own opportunity, or with the death threats and things that would come because it was very unpopular at the time. Examples being like Johnny Cash is somebody who made some songs that were at a time that was very not what the masses would want, but that was genuinely out of the kindness of his heart and the truth of his character. He was going and making these moves to try to make that change in the way he can. The Marilyn Monroes, who actually were going out and making sure that there was like, I do forget the Black musician, but she would make sure that she would be with her performing and getting opportunities and not being put in a segregated room, being treated with the right levels of care. There has always been people who are doing the good in the world. And then the ultimate form of that would be people who literally sacrifice their lives or put their life at risk and suffered the costs in doing so to protect just another fellow human being for no benefit of themselves more than the fact that they were going to stand by their morality at any cost. And I cannot describe enough, like, these are the truest definitions of heroes in our world today and in the past. And so we do need to honor these people and understand what that is. So to write off all of liberalism is just something that I can't stand for. So I'm going to give the perspective on those guys. And the examples that I would say for those are during the slavery period and post, it being illegal to do things like read. You would be able to, like for a Black person, if you tried to read when post, you would be able to try to vote, a bunch of different things, like go to integrated schools. There would be people who would try to actually, whether it's protest, do the L word, which I'm sure guidelines aren't going to be too happy with, and put an end to those people. The Black people trying to get that opportunity and to better themselves, and any white person that would try to help support that, right? So for the people who were getting hosed by dogs or getting hosed or being bitten by dogs during the civil rights movement, these are the same people that you see today who, when you say bleeding heart liberal, yes, they're fighting against real evil in the world that is being essentially Holocaust-esque denial ignored and just rewritten. So it's going to cause that strong level of emotion. And when these people do have the hearts that they do, you just have to make sure that you're actually considering the points that they have. And also, for my people, we have to make sure that we're not writing off all of the liberals along with the sheep's and wolf clothing, because there are people who are genuinely so worthy of being a part and standing side by side with us in this journey. So That is the perspective of the white liberal on the good side. And then I'm going to get into the bad side here. And in doing so, you're going to understand why there's a distaste toward them and why there is this back and forth and contention that exists. So to kind of cover like the main points of why people would dislike a liberal, there are some valid reasons. So like in the past, it would be, and Martin Luther King talked about this pretty good. I'll try to make a playlist where I have like a lot more videos so you can learn a lot more on the topic. But there in the past, there was the type of liberal that would want to kind of punish the conservative for what they've done, in the sense of trying to make sure that the conservative is put in a position even lower than the black people, because that was the way of trying to get back at them for the evils that they have genuinely done, which would actually be kind of fair in an honest world. But at the end of the day, all that does when you're dealing with the people who are in power is just kind of bring extra justifications and intensities around pushing back and trying to quell any growth or progress that gets done. The slippery slope effect is a term that you'll hear associated a lot with that, where you fear opening the door because then it gets pushed to a crazy degree. And when I talk about the co-opting, this goes to the next point of the flaws in that, is that there are people who co-opt and mess with and manipulate the message so that it gets discredited. So in this world where we're now seeing the slippery slope kind of realized, in the sense that like these are things that should be fair and legal, but the optics from the people who are saying this, the argument stands, which is the slippery slope on things like allowing the gay marriage, and now you have like LGBTQ and all these other things that they find so detestable. As long as it's not being done in a way that's harming the world, kids, so on and so forth, I see no reason why you should have any issue with that. But regardless, the point is, any of the points where you go from, okay, when it comes to the black issue, we have crime rates going up higher and so on and so forth. So you go, okay, well, you let them free, you let them integrate. Now we're dealing with crime and so on and so forth. When we talk about the factors that contribute to that, there's the manipulators, like those who try to force the mass incarceration when it comes to like the crack epidemic, putting crack in the communities, false arrests, all these things, intentionally sabotaging with police brutality, damaging the psyches of children through seeing these events and limiting the opportunity otherwise for success, crushing and quelling all the successful movements, whether it be like the Black Panthers, food and medical centers that they were actually creating to try to help these causes, discrediting and writing off what the actual cause was and making it seem like it was more of like a violent group. So the point is, the message and the intent, the things that were trying to be gotten across were all moral and pure. Although when you deal with leadership that wants to manipulate and run you off a cliff, essentially, if all you're trying to do is fight for better, and then somebody promises you, oh, you guys say you want to get this. No, let's take more and let's take it all. Come on. Most people are willing to go, more? I'm not fighting against that. Sure, why not? And then you end up writing off and like discrediting the entire thing in general. The best example I can see for this today would be something like the fact that defund the police was a movement that was supposed to be designed around the concept of your job is to do the defending and protecting and to make sure that crime gets handled. There's going to be a large area of times where it's not about defending and protecting or crime. It's just like a mental health issue. It's something trivial or something that a social worker might serve a better role in because of escalation and so on, and the jadedness that comes with being a police officer at times. So when it comes to that, that is a pure thing to request, like not defund, but to reduce funding and to put those funds into actually having third-party systems that serve and kind of be the quality service that's needed, and kind of actually take pressures and weight off of the police force in doing so. And to make that more realistic, there's actually a bunch of different like written plans for that you can actually look into, that it's very reasonable, very sensible. And the approach would be, you can have like an officer and a social worker type who would be able to be there. You wouldn't just be a social worker alone. And that social worker can kind of have some level of oversight with the officer in the event that certain things are going unjust, or just be doing the paperwork and serving that function of kind of making sure the officers don't have to do paperwork, offloading work on them, and making sure that third-party accountability is being put in place. But because the ease of trying to make that written off thing is pretty much just going, yeah, let's actually take all the funds from them. They were so bad, and we need to we need to punish them for what they do, right? We're bringing back to that thing I described before. So what you end up doing is invalidating the whole concept of trying to fix policing. So we don't defund the police. We just kind of write off all that your plans were and don't do it. Or worse, in certain areas, they did try to reduce the funding for policing. But when you say co-opting, what they did not do was then install those new plans and those new services as was asked and requested. So that's like a good example of what I was referring to in that sense. And from the negatives of the minority perspective around white liberals, the big thing that you'll see or that can be misconstrued and hard to read sometimes is the difference between appreciation, appropriation, and assimilation. So to kind of go through those really quickly, appreciation is somebody who is just genuinely involved in or sees and appreciates what's going on, whether it be Asian culture, Black culture, or anything else, where they want to involve themselves or participate, and that's completely fine. And the issue that somebody might have for an appreciator is that they might like start a business themselves doing the thing. So instead of it being like a Black business, or instead of it being like a Asian food store or like cooking class, it's somebody else doing it. And you go, well, I don't understand why you wouldn't just hire somebody who's in that culture to do it. But they might have that same level of understanding. So it's not wrong in its nature. But the thing that gets ignored is that you do attract people who would be in the class called the appropriators. And in appropriation, it is, I appreciate the thing, but I don't like the people. So in order for me to appreciate the thing, I need it to be done in a white, a Western, or in a lens that I deem appropriate, right? So the same exact thing, just put into another person's hand, now I can do it. This could go for somebody who, let's say, would never eat or would critique heavily something like a calamari or like a squid, things of that nature. But now that it's becoming pretty big in like the restaurant scene and all these other things, octopus, they're eating it and having no issue. But they would critique the people of another culture that they see doing it. So the appropriation point, and you see that with like music and from the Elvis examples and stuff prior, is that it creates an opportunity for that co-opter class to kind of come in and soothe or serve the function for providing, like stealing essentially the service and then providing it, and then in the worst case taking the credit for name of and revising it so that they say that it was never anyone else's, it was theirs to begin with. So you can see why somebody would have an issue with that, and you can see how even somebody who with a pure heart who is just doing it out of appreciation, how their client base might be the issue. And that is something that I don't think that they can really address unless they have the others involved who are from the culture we're referring to kind of taking that lead, because that kind of weeds out those who don't or wouldn't stand with you if you weren't in their specific interest, if that makes sense. And like you've seen that also with things like back before Black people were able to be on TV and things like that. There was this interesting fascination with Black people and Black culture that has always existed, and that's why so much of like appropriation and appreciation comes through the lens of Black culture. A lot of American culture is Black, and even back during slavery and past, there was always this, like for instance with minstrel shows, even the first shows, the first thing that you could do on TV that the masses could watch, it for some reason needed to be the observation and absorbing of Black content, but you don't want to have Black people that you're watching, so, or you don't want to give them jobs and opportunity. So what you do is you yourself take on the role and you dress up in that sense, and you become, and you also make sure that you demean instead of kind of uplift or empower in that sense. So that becomes the angle, and that is clearly why there's going to be a distaste and a disconnect there. And then the last group is going to be the assimilators, which is just somebody who came from that culture, right? So like if I am born in the inner city and I'm any other culture, but I adopt all these traits and stuff, I'm not going to get the same level of questions about appreciation or appropriation, because from my intent to my character, it's very visible and clear that I am rooted in it. And that can go for anybody coming from a different, like if a white person is like either born in or spends a lot of time in another country and has that purity in their exploration there, then they can actually become an assimilator as well. And the same thing can be done for like a black person that assimilates in the white culture, and maybe, whether it's like mudding, all the other things that you might want to get into. That would be that same example. So assimilation and appreciation are really just non-issues, but it's the appropriation that is going to find its way through that whole system that's going to kind of invalidate and cause some concern and some questioning when the intent isn't as clear, or when you're not kind of calling out those who are coming from that wrong angle of assimilation, right? Or appropriation. And when it comes to other ways that these things manifest, there's a whole list of them, but I'll cover it throughout, so you'll kind of get that as I'm going through it. So that's pretty much the perspective of like the masses when it comes to being a progressive or liberal, on the good and the bad side of that coin. And the next group that I'm going to cover is going to be the white conservative. And with them, I'm going to start with the good and then get to the bad. So like the viewpoint and perspectives that they come from is that they're genuinely the righteous, quality, good people, hard workers who are just trying to make their nation better and have to deal with the issues that come from the minorities that are extracting the wealth, and they are the reason why the nation and the world is in the state that it's in. And in the end of this, you'll understand that that's almost entirely false, but I will give the credence to the perspective, and then I will discuss the opposite side of that. So the conservative comes from different angles. So that can be like the Christian conservative. It can be the white nationalist, prideful, self-aggrandizing, like the white is right kind of a mindset, which manifests to the extremist form, or just the exclusivity form, where they just don't want any access to others. They don't want opportunities. And you see that the most when it comes to people pushing back against diversity and inclusion. So when you hear comments and things like that, the justification, the only thing that I really have that would make it sensible is the fact that they just think that everyone else is bad and that will corrupt and do bad to the good that exists in the world, is the viewpoint that they hold. And another perspective that comes from the conservative side would be like I just want to maintain the status quo. I grew up having exclusivity. I could get a job easily because it was only white people really in the area able to access these things. I didn't have to go through as much processes to get something. There was all this opportunity waiting for me, and I knew that my children would have that same level of opportunity. And then, just the exclusivity of everything. It really does, I would imagine, feel absurdly good to know that, that pride that would come from thinking that you guys are just so good that you were able to do all this, and that has to be something that it would be hard to shake. So that's going to be a large percentage of people as well, where they might not want people in their community. They might not want certain things of that nature. Another category of that conservative group would be the drinkers of the Kool-Aid that I was describing, which is the people who, as I said, with co-opting, this works on both ways. When it comes to like the elites or just the political sphere in general, it's always been a thing to kind of play the parties against each other, use race and fear specifically through propaganda to try to get the conservative party into the sense that the white people are the only ones who are equality. They're white. There's a couple terms I don't know how to best say with the guidelines, but white nextinction is one of the propaganda terms that you'll hear constantly, and that can be tied to things like being like not reproducing with each other enough to the point where you guys get erased for that purpose. And then the other side of it is the fear of like some insurrection-y event or some sort of a some race war type event, and that's why there's a lot of militia groups and a lot of things, and from the words in the Constitution to a bunch of other factors, where they've always kind of had that propaganda in their ear to watch out. And there's books and literature. The Turner Diaries is like one of the biggest ones. It's called the Second Bible of the Christian Right, and that is like pretty much. I can't describe too much because of the guidelines, and I don't want this video taken down. But you can learn a lot more about that. So there's the people who drank the Kool-Aid, who, if they had the proper information, they would be potentially acting different, but they live in a constant state of fear. And because of those co-opters, those who are manipulating, they end up voting against their interests, funneling that money up to the wealth in up to the top, and ending up in the same kind of oppressive situations with way less forms of oppression, but that same level of being used and extracted from. So there are people, like for instance, in coal mines, in one factory towns, in places that used to have work, like for instance the docks and things of that nature, we used to be super successful, and so did like the industrial places, whether it be steel or car manufacturing. And they would say that that is completely due to the fact that like there's too many other migrants and other people coming in and taking the jobs and things of that nature. But it was clearly the work of overseas, like sending your work overseas, cutting back, and instead of prioritizing nationalism and having these companies stay to provide for your fellow American and be like American made and all these things, the backing of like, okay, we can do whatever we want. We're not giving opportunities to these guys. So go get to where you can get some cheap labor, what have you. That type of backing is what allowed for this dynamic where we're losing opportunities and jobs, and where the supply and demand, the less jobs there are, more people looking for them. You could start making those jobs cost less. So instead of having wages increase over time, interest is increasing while wages are staying the same, and over enough time, it doesn't have to be said that that's untenable. We're on top of that, there's all these different policies and a bunch of other things. And I'm actually going to have a little pop up here because I had a little 3-post series about this topic on Instagram that kind of covers in the caption just like an entire list of pretty much all the things that are going on in that sense, at least from the perspective that I have and the information that I've gathered. I'm sure there's a lot more details to it, and there's probably some nuance as well. But as far as being open, non-biased about it, I definitely tried to make sure I covered it with as much grace and opportunity for correction as possible. But these are very provable things that you can look into and get documented, evidence for, whether it's from the government, whether it's from the corporations involved, or just individuals in all the many ways that you captured that. So yes, there are white people who are struggling and who lack opportunity, and because of that, those same people are now in the state where they're afraid, fearing that their opportunity isn't going to be there for the next generation, seeing that there's more self-loathing in their people, which is coming from the things done by their people in many cases, but the critiques that the rest of the world is starting to provide about these issues is what's kind of creating that pushback toward that self-loathing that you will see, and that lack of understanding to why the world is the way it is. It's the propaganda that keeps you from even being able to open your ear about a minority issue, or to want to hear any real reason why that it might involve themselves. And the term used to describe that kind of mindset or that type of response is called whitewashing or white backlash. And whitewashing is kind of like the projecting, the working around or trying to skirt around an issue, or worse, the negative, the angry pushback toward any kind of call out for any of the injustices or the actions that were done in the past. So there is that genuine sense from them that they are like a lamb-like people that have never done anything wrong, and that every critique against them is unjust. And if you live in that world and you think that, more power to you. But if you actually are understanding of all the facts, then you would see that they are probably one of the highest forms of narcissistic and cognitively detached people, in the sense that most of the things that they believe are rooted in lies. And in this podcast, I'm going to describe all the many ways that is. So when it comes to the negative perspectives of the conservative side, the issue that you're going to run into is like as I described before, it's a blatant and full-on Holocaust denial-esque vibe that goes around the revising of what happened in the history. And it's the most egregious when people are a little bit older, because 60 years ago is 60 years. There's people who are 60 years old saying that there was never any such thing as racism, or what is, you had every opportunity and it was squandered, so on and so forth. But these people were alive, and many of them, when I talk about the propaganda merchants, were the actors who contributed to and know very well the reason in history about the things that they're lying about. So when you're drinking the Kool-Aid, that's like, okay, I get it. You bought it. And I, at a point, because I lacked the knowledge and they did so good revising it, most of America does not know the knowledge about this stuff. So in this episode, you will walk away knowing what it's like to be a minority in America, as well as a white person in America, from a pretty fair perspective. But there is some real disgusting things going on in certain sects of that white conservative ideology that is written off and still seen as this lamb-like thing that's only just a defense or protective mechanism, that I just will show you that it was not, whether it's a chicken or an egg, we know which one came first. So we'll discuss that a little bit further. So that denial thing that I was describing, this is something that we deal with the most, because when you try to cover anything, and I'm sure there's already a lot of people who are getting mad about the fact that I'm talking about this topic, when we talk about deflections, I have no negative emotions about this, but you're going to hear things like, oh, you must have so much hate in your heart about us and all these other things. And it's that trying to get us to not be able to express, or like, why are you so focused on the past? That kind of a thing. The same people who would complain about statues not being there or having like antebellum parties and appreciating that same exact era in time. My past was a lot more sad, but it's the same past in the same era. So you can appreciate it, but I can't know how to fortify and not have that happen to me, but you can know and enjoy the horrors that was your past. It's like an interesting take. So that hypocrisy factor is something that's full on. So when you're interacting with people and trying to call these things out, it can be maddening at times, and that's why you see a lot of emotional responses. And these guys do this on purpose as well. So I'd like to describe this as like the smiley face like thing, where like people will pretend to be stupid and act like they don't know what's going on or they don't get it, to try to like get a rise out of you and poke and prod. So like, for instance, I'm actually going to show you a few examples right here in a second of when you try to discuss and make people aware of certain issues, you're going to end up with people who kind of give you this like, oh, so what's the issue? So you must be the real problem here. It's this creepy, you know what you're doing and you're playing stupid thing that just never ends. And it is like that, like purge kind of scary, purge face, like scary movie thing, where it is that weird, creepy energy. And that same energy is what you saw when there was kids sitting around watching an L Word, or people happily standing by as there's like protests or police brutality going on. Or like, by protests, I actually mean white protests against things like, integrated schools and stuff. So this is like an energy that has always existed. And if you go back in time, you know which roles everybody is going to fall into. And that's why it has this level of hurt and depth to the experience. Because it is not just words, it is a literal translation of actions, if legal and in the right state and time. Because these people actually do feel and have the same level of apathy about these main issues. Born out of this, we are the only ones righteous and we're the only ones that should be good and pure and everything else should be erased. But at the end of the day, if that is not the most evil thing, and if you saw it in another culture, like there's no, like, what are we doing? So it's like, what we're talking about. But they do that, so you can't have a conversation about it. And they seem like they're winning and they're slick in the eyes of themselves and anybody who, when you get away with it, it is that great feeling, I would imagine. But to anybody who's educated and has any understanding, you just look like an idiot who is genuinely on the furthest scale of mental health, that you would call that you would make that same argument if it was done in the inverse by any other people. So that is what I will describe in much more detail, but that is the type of thing that we're talking about. And it is overarching to the degree where, as I said before, many liberals, because they drink the Kool-Aid, it's not just a conservative thing. There's a lot of liberals that hold that same opinion. So they might not be like intentionally doing this creepy thing where they're lying and acting like they don't know what's going on. But what they will do is have those same points. So why are you trying to push back against this? Why can't you just let it go? Why are you worrying about this? I know that, but still, it's not that big a deal. It'll get better over time. Who cares if it doesn't happen in your lifetime? It's fine. Just let it happen, maybe possibly for your grandchildren. Like that mindset is something that, once again, the hypocrisy factor, they're talking about. I mean, the white fear that is coming around the minority situation, the bar is so much lower for the offenses that have fallen on them versus what's fallen on us. But I hear calls for for an extinction. I hear all kinds of crazy things that I know a lot more details on that I'm not going to be describing. But these are the things that are so rooted in why people have that strong level of distaste. And when you hear words like white devil, that is a very strong thing, but it is to the degree, to the individuals that's describing, not generalized, to that very specific subset. That is a uniquely Western thing, and that play is something that is genuinely some of the most disgusting, evil stuff on the planet Earth. It's the equivalent of going up to somebody who had survived the Holocaust, telling them nothing happened, it's your fault, get up off your bootstraps, and why are you still thinking about it? And then on top of that, working to try to sabotage and do things on the back end to keep them from doing well afterward. As I said, put it in another creed, you know it's wrong, you know it's evil, and the reason why it's getting pushed and let go is that either people that game it wins, or there's a cognitive dissonance where there is, even in a lot of like the pure-hearted people, a fear of addressing and seeing the flaws in the world. And you see that in the sense of you might see somebody who goes, oh no, I don't want to see that the world's bad, oh no, I can't believe that. And a lot of victims suffer greatly because people don't want to see the world as being that bad, in the sense of like, no, there's no way that the police could do that, there's no way that things could be this bad in the world. So denial coming and rationale coming from the sense of purity is even a thing as well that affects us. And you see that with the liberal side, but you'll see that even with some apathetic conservatives. And that is something that I describe as being an issue that is overarching way more than like it should be in the Caucasian culture. But at the same time, it is not the Caucasian culture, because as I described before, there are people who died in order to protect and to do good for others with no benefit to themselves. So we can't write them off and give them that negativity, because I will stand with the people who did that every day on earth, because that is not something that we can skate by the same way that we can't skate by the offenses and things that these guys have done, right? And on the other side of the conservative coin would be the Black and minority conservatives. And to kind of best describe them, it would be the self-loathing, the ones who feel that the only way to kind of be accepted and appreciated in that community is to assimilate. And there is that force for assimilation, that call for don't be so connected to your culture. I don't want to be hearing you speaking in your own language or having your own garb and traditions. Like this is the level that it goes to. Like whether it be the many times where like if a person celebrates another religion, like a Christian kind of misconstrue whatever the message or thing is as satanic and try to condemn and erase it. And this is coming from people with the appreciation of this nation because it was based on the freedom of religion, expression, and speech, right? But they would never allow it to actually occur. And these same people who would have so many negative things to say about really just any random thing that could be done by a minority or anything else. It could be just the fact that they're poor, the health standards, or what have you. They could say horrendous things about us. But at the same time, if they even hear as much as me having this conversation, they will say that it's coming from hate. And why are you spending time on another creed? You should be focusing on your own and yourself. This is why people have this distaste toward that. And that assimilation is something that even manifests in the form of like forcing certain things. Like if they condemn your culture, you should also condemn your culture, or you get seen as maybe a target to them as well. And we see this in the political space where both parties, like they act like they're open-minded, but if another member of their party has a positive point to say about the opposition, all of a sudden it's, oh, are you actually bad? And that same mindset is what is a self-regulator that keeps everybody in the assimilation path and kind of in the camps that they are in, unable to consider or educate themselves on other topics. So the Black and minority conservative is something that I can consider in like 3 different classes, which would be the self-loathing, similar to the white creed, but it's a little bit more understandable in the sense that they're coming from the angle of the fact that their cultures are so like lacking and diminished, having, let's say, violence and crime because of certain things were actually done to sabotage these communities. And if you look into the history, a lot of these places were very successful and thriving without European interest involved, and then became destabilized either as a way to kind of extract and access the means of them, or just to kind of ensure that there wouldn't be anybody else that can kind of come above and like quell what they were doing. But that being said, so places like Africa, places like India, the Middle East, there's plenty of places that were extremely successful. So like Africa, Timbuktu was a place you would go for education, and the Silk Road was like a huge thing, and Africa did a lot of contributions in areas of like medicine and many other really important things. Obviously the resources were huge, and it's not that we never used our resources. There was many places that we did. So like, for instance, when it came to like Mali is one of the richest places that it ever been at the time where it was. And it was Mansa Musa is the case study you can study if you want to learn more about that. Carthage, the Carthaginians almost defeated Rome itself in the Punic Wars. Many people know about the Moors and many other cases where it's not been this lie that has been told to you. Like the Ottoman Empire actually conquered Greece for a period. Like these are not like unestablished places that had nothing going on, and they've just been war torn, and they needed to be civilized. This is revisionism in order to kind of keep that pride and that white savior mindset in the conservative that exists. But because of that gaslighting and the erasure of all that information, there are many black and and minorities who are conservative and who back and believe that tale. For that reason, they are fully on board in condemning their people, and they have that self-loathing that comes from it. And as I described in some of my prior episodes, when I was younger, I kind of fell into that camp to some degree. Now, I've always seen quality in my people, but as far as like the manipulation of statistics and the lack of the telling all the reasons why poverty is the way that it is and things, you can easily get people to kind of hate and kind of step away from their people, assimilate into your own. And when you see the success that comes from it and the fact that these guys really are the only ones in these communities, it is just them, and this is the only area where success exists in America, and they've destabilized my place, so I don't have a premise for success there, it really does seem like maybe they're onto something. So buying that, drinking the Kool-Aid is a real thing that we have to watch specifically hard coming from our perspectives, because when you see what looks like a valid case study for that being accurate in the success valley, you need to have the facts if you're going to believe anything different. So when it comes to the black culture, you will see that in areas from the past, which would be like a free man who decides to actually go out and own slaves himself if allowed, or let's say the slave or the house a Negro that would actually go and protect and kind of conserve and stand with the slave owner at the time in order to kind of make sure that they have that level of quality life and assurance or protections, right? So that same psychology exists to today, and you see that in like areas like policing, where like a black officer, instead of trying to call out and make any noise or rock the boat, might actually double down and be even more strong on the way that they handle things to kind of prove themselves, almost to kind of be that. And that same thing exists in the minority sects as well. You'll see that in the Spanish world, because it'll come through the lens of kind of denying immigration, or kind of making claims against low quality work, or maybe like not having the highest form of English ability to speak the language. So they'll kind of condemn. You'll see that in the black form of like, they'll start a conversation by saying things like, you know, oh, well, I listen to everything, but I don't listen to rap. Or like they'll have like oh, I don't know, sagging their pants, or they'll find a way to kind of, hey, I'm different. I'm separate. I'm not a part of this. That is a part of that same like proving yourself, and that same drink that Kool-Aid. That's the glass has been poured for you, and it's up to you to sip. But when you're in that environment and you have a whole bunch of people around waiting for you to take that sip, a lot of people do. And so it's one thing to have those opinions, and that's the perspective for both sides. I can go a little bit deeper on the minority in a second. But the issue that you deal with that is that it's all based and rooted in falsehoods and manipulation coming from the very people that you are standing with, because those are the ones who are doing that falsehoods and manipulation. And you kind of serve the purpose. And I've actually seen this and been around this a couple of times, where you kind of serve the purpose as the the prover of concepts, like the enabler for the people who feel that way or who maybe are on the fence of being apathetic, and then they see somebody on their side, on the opposite side, who's agreeing with them, and then they can feel more comfortable in their statements. Or you see those who are a little bit more on that rough side, on that disgusting evil side, that kind of see that person as kind of like a pet and a cute little thing. It's like, hi, look at how easy this thing is manipulated. And you might see that from like the Black Klan members, or and from the Asian perspective, it might be coming through the lens of critiquing certain things about your people that get generalized or that get removed from context. So, like describing how nasty it is to eat certain things that they may consume, talking about certain issues with the government being so totalitarian and harsh in the way that they conduct themselves, and a bunch of other examples. But this is something that is the most funny, coming from a government that is probably more guilty of that in terms of like intentionally making people suffer without cause. Like, I'm pretty sure in Asia it's all about like employment and making you like, oh, you aren't living up to a standard and honor system and things of that nature, or just kind of keeping the poor in their like situation, because there are so many you don't have enough to uplift everybody, you don't want to uplift everybody. So that is kind of like the way to do it, is keep them in that poverty state. They can never overthrow, they can never compete with you as a government or as a elite, what have you. So we have the same systems, like the misinformation and the lies around the media and all these things. We are just as guilty, but you can drink that Kool-Aid and be convinced that the only people who are pure in the entirety of the world is the West, and that they're genuinely infallible and lamb-like, which you want to take great inspiration from. So it's not that they will have self-aggrandizement or like a self-righteousness about themselves as much as they will about white people. And then in that, they kind of see themselves as being the good one, and that gives them their special class in a sense. So that is the minority and Black conservative side of the coin, and that manifests as clear as day from the things that you see specifically today. But in the past, it was a little more fair because the radicalization of everything wasn't as bad, and information had a little bit more fairness to it. Now, information echo chambers make it to where the information, like, people are discussing this. I'm about to cover all of this right now, and in the next 20 years there's still going to be people saying I don't have any idea why these things exist. People have been discussing this for many, many, many years, but it's that closed mind and that forced assimilation that keeps you from being able to kind of even go through that form of re-educating that even took me a little while to do. But when you're in that mindset, you, even though you are laughing about racist things in these environments, and you know they are, you have the ability to still convince yourself that there is no, it's just justified, this is just an observation. So even the people on that self-loathing perspective also might think that there is no racism, and everything that's coming, every critique against the Western world is invalid and unjust. It's an excuse to clarify why you're in the situation you're in. That is a horrible perspective, and that's the same perspective that the people who are pouring the Kool-Aid have, the propaganda merchants. And the scary part is if you actually are fully aware of all the facts and you are just lying to try to convince the people to drink the Kool-Aid, or if you're just somebody who just doesn't have the information you want to learn, or and you want to, you would be doing better if you had information, but you don't because it's made unavailable to you. But the thing that actually made me kind of start to study history and like correct the ways that I thought was because it was something so jarring. So I've had plenty of experiences when it came to like super racial situations occurring, but this one, when I was going door to door, I knocked on one person's door, and we were having like a nice cordial conversation, and I was just talking about like, wow, you know, you were first homeowner here, you've been here for 40 years, so tell me, like, has it, like, was it like dirt back then, like the dirt roads, like how much was established, like is all this stuff new? I lacked a lot of knowledge of like how long it's been, uh you know, since it took for things to kind of be established and so on. And they were pretty much like, oh nope, it looked just about the same as it did today. Back in the day though, there was that, you see that tree over there, yeah, the police would take the black boys and they would beat them over there. And he said that with like this kind of like looking up in the air, longing kind of a thing. And that was like the first time where I kind of went like I thought that all this abuse stuff, because I lacked the understanding in the past. Watch my previous episode if you want more context on this. But I lacked understanding in the past, so I was kind of like, oh, this happened like in the world that looks how I know it today. Like I thought this was like something that happened 200 years ago, like the Kool-Aid drink, like the Kool-Aid would entail, right? But that being said, so at the end of that, I went and I started learning and doing research and started seeing, okay, there's actually real facts to all the things that people have been claiming as far as like this stuff. The Western world's ideologies or like history is completely falsified. So that kind of opened my eyes. And once I started to learn how much was false, I had to train my discernment. So I wasn't necessarily so amped and ready to believe and trust all this stuff. Unlike, like, I wasn't like, oh, yes, finally, proof. I went, the entire world is saying that this is real and only 10% or less than 10% are saying that it's not. Occam's razor, like the easiest answer is correct, told me, that it definitely has to be false. So you're almost closed-minded in seeing the facts even once you've been presented them. But over enough discernment and open-mindedness, you can begin to start to understand, and then you see corruption and you see all the like it's so well documented that you can't deny it. If you see the it's recorded, it's everything. It's in the policy. So that being said, that is what actually opened me up and got me out of being in that space, in that sphere around that kind of like self-loathing, minority conservative-esque energy. But you can be a minority conservative and be just like a quality person who only wants simple things. And I'm not saying that all conservatives are this bad phenotype, but I've already described the good, and some of them are just good people. There are that Christian, like pure, I'm actually good. But the issue that you run into is that there's a lot of people that their morality only exists for the other. It does not exist for themselves, and they actually call for harsher actions and horrid things to be done for much lower bars than what they say that people should be silent or content about. So just the awareness around that, because as I started to kind of get that better state of mind, I at least thought, okay, it is still fair. Like, the world isn't fair. People are going to, like, some innocent people suffer because you have to get the guilty people, what have you. I internalized that. And then the funniest example is like when it came to economic opportunity and things should be done to make opportunity for people and so on. When I saw that when it came to the like writers and like actors having harder times getting roles, which I don't know how real that was to the big degree, but as far as like white writers and stuff not having opportunities, the call for change and the demand for being heard and like addressed about that issue was the real opener for me to kind of go, I actually live up to the value and morality that you set because I drank the Kool-Aid. So I actually can understand being like, okay, yeah, if opportunity isn't there, you work to get your own and so on. Like I grew up by the mindset of you have to be 2 times better to be seen as equal. So I went, done. Let's work on it. I wasn't going to complain. I wasn't going to do anything. So now when I see them in that same situation, and you're not going to get yourself up by your bootstraps. You're talking about jobs being like unavailable for like all the different groups that I described earlier, and yet that same get up off your bootstraps, learn new skills energy isn't there. Like that shows me that you are like it was the most fascinating level of proof of hypocrisy from the people that were so strong for such a lower bar. Like we've been barred from opportunity, and we've had 60 years as a black people at least of really having somewhat opportunity. Even that has been done in like a de facto way. They've had all the opportunity and chances, and they have like because of the things I'm going to discuss later, you'll understand that like a large number of white people have had opportunities to be really successful. So you have family members that you can connect with, and if you were this big unit and so on, the way that they demand of us, you would help each other and make each other do better. But you keep that, and it's not like everybody who's wealthy in the white communities that are super successful are going to the coal mines and funding them and giving the good education themselves. You got to build it for yourself. That's the stuff that you hear. And now they're calling for the government to do all these extra things, but it's the complete opposite of what they would even want. If you even just said, make that same rule apply nationwide to all groups, help and uplift the coal miners, but also do the same policy for minority groups, you will actually see conservatives, specific sect of them, literally say, you know what, never mind. And this is what happened, where back in the day before civil rights, people said there should be a job for everybody available for every American. There should be a social safety net. There should be public services, and there should be certain standards and stuff that the nation provides its people. And once it became something where the door was opening to everybody else, they kind of shut that down as a way to say, if they're going to get it, nobody can get it. Which, once again, voting against your own interest through fear, they got the poor people to do that. And Lyndon B. Johnson has a quote, if I'm recalling it correctly, it's, tell a white man that he's as good as, the poorest white man that he's as good as the highest quality black man, and you don't even have to steal his money, he'll just give it to you. Like, that is the co-opting manifested. And you can learn a lot more about this through history, because as I said, it's documented as that. Like, it's not hidden. And the last community that I'm going to talk about is going to be like the progressive or the aggrieved black community. And with that, I kind of already described a good number of examples of why they would be in a situation where they would be aggrieved, and where there would be some animosity or negativity around dealing with the Western world. But to kind of give a little bit more context to that. So when it comes to the same angle that I took with the conservative side, there is that super prideful and happy about like who you are as a people. And that can come in a scale. So there's those who are just proud of what we've overcome and still been able to be strong on. And then there's those who are just full on like putting things that weren't real in order to kind of put themselves on a pedestal. That self-aggrandizing nature that you see in the same exact way with the white conservative. So it's two different sides of the same coin. And if you look at it objectively, it is very much a similar manifestation. But a little bit of that is born out of necessity, in the sense, and I'm not justifying like a racist who comes from that angle, because you can't be black and racist. It's not like there aren't other groups that you can be negative to as far as like the things that you would say. I never get why people act like you can't be this, you can't be that. Human nature is human nature, and there's a lot more justification, I would say, in being a black person who has these negative feelings towards the white community that is guilty of these things. But it's because of the revisionism and that like that smiley face ignoring and acting like things didn't happen, and that you even get from liberals sometimes, that does kind of make them kind of feel that it might be overarching. Like, for instance, if that person were to try to call out like a racist act, or to actually ask somebody who they feel is like progressive and somebody that they can trust, like, hey, like, what are some examples of racism, or like, what are the things that you've seen, because I know that I'm dealing with this, and I don't have necessarily like a thing to put my hands around as far as like, this is the thing that is doing it. I have the feeling of oppression. I have the sense that I'm hated and loathed, but because I can't have a proper communication or conversation with somebody who will admit it, I'm kind of left unsure of what's going on, and I end up just putting everybody in that box. That's generalizing just the same as the calling all of us not good or whatever. And that being said, I say that there is a lot wrong with that, but it is rooted in both the concept of trying to be just put yourself in the shoe. Like, come on now. Like, for specifically like the conservative that would be the most confused on this perspective, if you were in that position, you'd be burning things to the ground. They aren't even doing that. They're not even near that. They, like, as I said, like me, like, it is very much like an internalized, this is how the world is, but it's annoying. So to not address that and to not feel that is like a problem. But at the same time, the other coin would be like those who kind of have that self-worth that is so strong. Sometimes it's just born out of that same human nature of hierarchies and trying to put yourself on top. Other times it is that like you have been literally at the bottom of the totem pole in the Western world, as far as propaganda, as far as opportunity, as far as viewpoint. Like, if you actually, and this is something that I can even relate to, if you try to even, like, let's say, communicate with, and in times, let's say you want to start a relationship with, it could be a white person, but it could also be Middle Eastern person, Asian person, Indian person, any other culture, because the Western world has kind of provided that the blueprint for how you should view everybody. It is very common for people to hate us and to be like, oh, why did you bring him to my home? Why do you have a black friend? Why would you want to marry a black person or be with a black person? And you cannot say that is not something that you experience, no matter how high on the standard of quality of success or what have you that you get to. Like, I've, in most of the relationships that I had that were not with another black person, it was really pretty much either you had to hide me from your parents, you had to kind of make it this thing where you have to spend a whole lot of time trying to explain the situation, or you have to either like potentially break from your parents and like cause a severance in the relationship almost. Like, yes, there are plenty of parents that are also just as on board with it, but when you talk about the black experience, when you see these things that you are running into constantly, and that same thing manifests with jobs, that same thing manifests with all these other environments, it is unimaginably concerning and hurtful. So you do need to kind of wear this level of pride. Like, black power is actually not rooted in the same roots as white power. That's why it gets the pushback that it does, because when white people hear it, they translate it to what white power means, like supremacy and all these things. Black power, at least in its roots, is specifically kind of the energy of, hey, no, you are not this thing. You are not this worthless. You are not this unable. You do have that power. You are beautiful. You are this. You are that. And that's why terms like king and things like that are so big. Also in reference to the fact that we were once kings and queens in the countries that we were in, and they try to deny that. So it's like, it's a pushback to this. And I would say that on both sides of that spectrum, conservative and black, it's the hatred that hate breeds is like a term that you could use to describe this. And so like when you see, as a black person, a self-loathing black person, that can hurt your heart the same way that if you're conservative, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about, in the sense that like, it's like, man, we went through all this, we had all this suffrage, and your family members, the people that I know, and if I'm older than you, me, myself, my generation, we went through all of this so that you can hate yourself and that you drank the Kool-Aid. That is crushing to the soul of a black person, especially when it comes to when those who are doing good, they assimilate. When you do that and you kind of do that condemnation thing that I referred to from like the black conservative angle, you end up being, instead of helping and kind of being the one to give back and like do good for your community and be like a beacon of that, there are plenty of black people that are not that, but they don't get the credence that they're super successful, but not in that like kind of joining the Western negativity in that sense. Those people aren't going to have the same level of visibility in the Western world, in the European eyes and the what have you. So you kind of write that off. And the issue that you run into is that you end up in a situation where people think the only successful black people are people who took the role model of whiteness, when instead it's just the baseline of human nature, which is, if you have access to education, if you have access to as far as like businesses and all these things, like you would gain certain skills when it comes to the ability to sell and communicate to a certain degree, when it comes to the way that you can kind of control and navigate your emotions and all these other things. So when you see those who fall short of that disconnect is something that kind of hurts even more, because it's like, you should be that bastion, that role model, and you're not. Then there's those who are suffering and self-loathing, whether it could be depression, it could be giving up on their race and so on and so forth. And you see that in the Candace Owens and all these things. It is a real situation that you're dealing with. And I don't want to hear anything about, oh yeah, we're divided, we can't do anything, because that's the same exact dynamic when it comes to the self-loathing liberal and the white person. But it's way more disgusting in the sense that, or in the conservative, I mean. In the conservative comes from the angle of just, no, we're dominant, you should be ashamed of what we do. Yeah, it's awesome still. Like that's the energy that they're coming from. That is a very different angle than what the black counter to the self-loathing is, which is, no, these guys are the reason why this is the case, and you are buddying up with them. And I'm not describing all of white people, I'm saying the specific that conservative or even radical conservative racist type. That is the definition of like becoming like having a child that you kind of went through this struggle with, you fought for to try to get the same opportunities and to finally maximize and capitalize on what you could not access in your life. And then they kind of become the the reason why the word Uncle Tom is used so much is because it's a direct tie to what would be a house Negro. And to kind of give you some more context for this, Uncle Tom and an Aunt Jemima, which is why the syrup was supposed to be canceled in that time where you're like, why are we canceling all this stuff? Because we don't know you guys don't know the history. It's a bastardization, or you literally are lying about not knowing it. But the point is, so when you have like a house Negro, the role of that was to kind of be like the security to make sure that like if the field Negroes are doing anything, they're keeping an eye out, so on and so forth, and they get treated a little better, but still in that submissive, subservient, like that kind of a thing. So the point is that you kind of are in that role as that self-loathing individual. And to the field Negro who loses their child after all that suffrage, and you're still getting beaten by the system essentially, and that child goes to protect that system instead of try to help bring awareness to, like, call it out so it gets better. Instead, they join in it. It's going to create an enormous divide that I feel is far more justified than the liberal conservative divide, at least when it comes to the European perspective. And I don't really understand why this isn't universally known, other than the fact that the information is manipulated or hidden intentionally. But it is something that like is kind of obvious as long as you actually have the facts around this issue and you're not being closed-minded or intentionally daft, essentially. And just to kind of show how this exists, like freedom of expression and protest is something that is supposed to be an American thing that is founded and we support so much when it's happening, at least in like the Western perspective. The minority perspective tends to get a different response. So there's many times where a protest can happen, and there's certain places where you can just protest regardless. But in many of the places that require a permit and things of that nature, there's many times where a Black community, a minority community, might not be able to get that permit. But hate groups that exist within the conservative right, specifically neo N-words and white nationals. There's a couple different other ones that I'm not going to say too much about. But that being said, these guys tend to be able to get those permits because these guys there's a lot of police and judicial and political people in these spaces. Just like the jobs themselves, police, the judiciary, politics, a lot of these things are family and generational things that you kind of get into and continue in that same exact way as these groups that I'm talking about. And the way that they work is that a lot of them, it's like a membership thing. They have cards that they use. They have structures you have to pay so that it creates like a financial capital for them. Some of them will do like illegal things like the drug running and like the gun selling, which is the same thing as like a Sons of Anarchy type situation. And I'm sure there's a lot of connections between these biker gangs and those groups. There's a whole bunch more, as I said. I'm not going to be saying too much. But when it comes to the reality of these things, like for instance, actually on that point, the Sons of Anarchy, known to be a gang that's doing illegal things and so on, and a bunch more, they have been the security for several people in several scenarios where the police back them and support them. The root alone, regardless of even if they changed, which in many cases they did not, the root of their origin alone would be enough if it was another group to say, why would you ever have them be there? You can never have that person be the one backing it. And then the funny thing when it comes to these groups, like they shouldn't be able to work together and be as a unit, right? The police and the Sons of Anarchy or some of the other groups, like the hate groups and stuff. The funny thing when it comes to them is that in many cases, those hate groups, those militias, those biker gangs and so on are very anti-cop. They're very anti-authority in government. They're very like, if a gun law gets changed, if this happens, if the wrong person gets in office, they're ready to do all kinds of things. So these are the same people grandstanding about making sure that you stand up for the officers and you do this and that. And it is corruption all around. Even though they can hate each other, they work together because they're one and the same. So you act like, oh yeah, well, see, they can come together still. They have always been the same community. And even the police officers are sometimes the one who are like, oh yeah, the law, the authority, da, 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 da. But we are the ones enforcing and kind of cracking skulls, making sure people are staying in their place. That's actually a lot of cases the energy that the police in the inner cities come with. So when people are like, you think they're actually going around just trying to mess with people? It's one of the dumbest points I've ever heard from the history prior, as well as the thousands of examples. I myself have dealt with so much bullshit when it comes to that stuff, and I could not be more like trying to be in the right and doing the right thing. That like I could not even imagine. All I would need to do is just wear like a little bit more of an urban outfit and just maybe have dreadlocks, and it's game over for me. Like you act like these things aren't crazy, and I'm not saying it would be like an end of my life situation, but I'm saying as far as how close things got, like I've had a security guard, like as a skateboarder, I was permitted to be able to skate around wherever I would like to, right? And there was a little like I talked to like companies and stuff. There was like a guy who owned a door factory, and I would actually be skating, and he'd like provide doors that we could use to skate on and grind because they'd be throwing them out. And across the street there was an armored truck factory. We were actually so cool with that community in that area that the armored truck factory, we told them there was like another building adjacent to them. It's like a big factory plaza that for some reason the door was open and it was just like hanging out. So we let them know. They were like, oh, you know what? It's actually empty. Nobody works in there anymore. So if you want to, you guys can actually go in there and use it as like a little winter skate spot. So ultimate permission, ultimate like sanction to be there, right? And one time we were just skateboarding, and then there's some random security guard comes over, and he's just talking to me and my friend, and I'm thinking we're like 12, we might be 14 at the time. And while he's talking to us, he just has his hand on his gun. Like, I don't know what he was, we were just being, like I'm talking. Like, I'm not being crazy. I don't have anything on me. We're not even close enough for me to be doing anything that he would need to worry about moving quick. This is the energy that they come with. And another example of that is when I was actually 12, like just being in that same community with my skateboard friends, because this was like right next to my house. Now I'm saying this from the context of being like in my personal neighborhood. I've had an officer come and tell us that we weren't able to stay where we were because it's loitering. And I was like, oh no, this is my friend's house. He actually lives right, like this is his door. And they were like, I know, but somebody called and said that, there's some kids hanging out here. So can you guys just like go somewhere else or something? And so these are the things that we're talking about, where it's like, even if I'm doing absolutely everything right and I'm being a respect, like we're as a skateboarder, we're off the road. If we see a car coming, like hey man, we'll help you cross the street. Like we'll clean up trash. We are not the problem at all. Probably better than a lot of skateboarders of all creeds as far as like doing right by the community that you're skating in, right? These are the things that you deal with no matter how good you are, how good you try to be, or whatever you try to do to avoid these things. The statistics are never going to show that there's ever any issues. People make arguments like hate crimes are low and things like that. The police are the ones that are outsourced to do that type of stuff. So, and you see, and I'm going to show in the reaction video I do, they very frequently revise the history. They'll even work with the coroners and the actually, I don't want to speak too much on this because I've already covered that in another episode. So I will just leave it there. If you want to learn more, just check I think the last episode out. But yeah, there's just a endless amount of areas where this stuff is just vile from the rooter to the tutor. And to add on to what I was saying about the outsourcing of policing and things like that, as far as like hate crimes and so on, like some of the best examples are just like the Karen scenario, where you trump up a random charge, you just lie about something, and you just pretty much can get the police to come over with so much aggression and animosity that they're ready to rock and do whatever before they ask questions. And then another extension of that is in like the last 20 years, back when it was a little more okay for you to be able to do it yourself, what would be done is they would just make sure they would entice or like antagonize a black person or community in order to make sure that they were to get the response that they need, in that same kind of like smiley face weird thing where they're trying to get you to act out of character. The goal that a lot of these guys have when they do this is pretty much just to kind of get you into a situation where you say something and then it gets a little contentious, and then they can kind of use castle doctrine and protect themselves. Or I'm sorry, not castle doctrine, but stand your ground law, if that is a thing that applies. Both will be the case if it's like near a person's house and you're like, what? Come over and talk to me. And you can kind of trigger that kind of a thing. There's cases I've seen of this, so I'm not making it up. It's not, I could show you, and I actually will be showing you in the reaction video without showing you, the end result. That being said, I mean, there's famous cases of this, like the guys who like knock on a dude's door, says, or window, and says like, turn down your music when the music isn't actually that loud, and then shoots the guy in the back seat. That's one enormous case. There are a bunch of different ones, but I mean, I've seen a lot that were just like not covered that well. So I mean, this is not something that's like some small random thing that doesn't happen all that often. The George Zimmerman is actually probably one of the better examples of this. Like, if you're innocent, but they just say they saw something, and now they're trying to do some citizens arrest type thing, I have to be at the whim of them, or if I do anything against them, they're ready and prepared because they wanted to do anything to me. And then when the police officer comes, it's not like they're going to come and hear my side and go, hey, let's escalate. So what's your perspective? What's your perspective? So, and even me being who I am, I have no recourse in that. So this is the issue that you deal with. And it's not something that does not happen no matter who you are. Like, this is not just be good. So what would you do wrong then? Like, this, it's bullshit. And then like another like funny example of that same hypocrisy is that the bar that they feel for the stand your ground law is so much lower than the bar that they feel. Like, for instance, you'll always hear comments like, oh, black people are always going to shoot each other. They don't fight, da 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 da. They're always ready to do whatever. There's actually a case that happened recently of a guy who was doing like a little prank in like a mall, and he was just like kind of bothering the guy without like touching him or anything like that. And after warning him like 3 times not to walk away, he just shoots the guy in the mall. I'm hoping that he had some muzzle discipline, but even with that in mind, people were completely valid in their appreciation for that. As far as like the NRA would stand for it, everybody was like, yes, that's what happens. These pranksters need to stop or what have you. So you're willing to shoot and potentially kill people for somebody you know is not going to be that violent in a scenario where you could probably get safety very quick. And these are all the arguments that you would make. And then when you're talking about somebody who's in like a community that actually has some danger, like where you actually might run into some robberies and things of that nature that directly affect you, when black people have these interactions, both parties tend to get arrested. And the argument is, oh yeah, they're so quick to shoot and this and that. You guys, one, like as somebody who's actually a pacifist who like wouldn't want to ever shoot somebody who's trained and very good with a gun, but who would be traumatized, I feel, or would have a harder time if I actually took a life. I actually never want to get in that scenario. I made myself ready, but I'm not trying to do that. Unlike the same people, you guys are just as bad as the black people who are actually killing each other and stuff, because you just don't have the opportunity to do it, and the police are able to kind of cover you. But if the police weren't there to do it and like ignored your calls and stuff like they can do with us, you would take matters in your own hands. And if they were like the ones doing it and they were incompetent, they were just treating you horribly and so on and so forth, you wouldn't be wasting time calling. And you'd probably be talking to them actually. But the point is, when it comes to these things, there is just such a ridiculous falsehood and like manipulation around what the actual laws should be. And you can't tell me there's any equality in the judicial system when this level of bias exists. And when I believe like 80% or something like that, some crazy high number of the judges and things of that nature are white. So there's plenty of people who are progressive, but as I said, legacy families, so on and so forth, in the judiciary, it's not going to be as progressive as it is conservative, and that's been shown by the numbers. And so this can be an innocent black person, this could be a guilty person, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the law, there is a high level of prioritizing, like making sure that you don't do harm to somebody's freedoms, and like, oh, they had a hard life, so let's give them some grace, or this is only a little weed that he had on him. Come on, kids will be kids. And then when it's literally me, it could be me, the same person is willing to put me in jail for years when they would fight to get somebody out for way worse. So you understand, this is something that does affect every one of us. And that is not just black people, but the black people specifically because of the fear mongering, the history between us, and the way that they intentionally sabotage to make these things occur. We are very much on the highest scale of this inequality and inequity because of the things created. Another layer that makes the black community a little bit different than other minority communities is the fact that if another minority community came from another culture, and this it can even be like an African community, like a Jamaican community, they had more access to education in their own like long form, long storied history to pull from. So when it comes to educators, when it comes to skills and ability and things of that nature, they have always had that. So even if you give them poverty, even if you put them in a building that's dilapidated, or you just put them in a field, they would still have the ability to have these same educators with the same knowledge to kind of provide and give that same level of information. Whereas in the black community, the slave community, it was originally or fully erased. They made it illegal for you to read, specifically around the time of like the Haitian Revolution, as like a way to kind of make sure that they didn't see a precedent for being able to get freedom through like a revolution. But at the end of the day, the point was that they made sure that you would have no connection to any of your culture, and that you would only get the information that they provided to you, which made it so much easier to manipulate the truth. And so the Sisters of the Confederacy, right around the time where slavery ended, made it so that the books that would be put in the schools were all books that were kind of like what the South would want. And it was like what allowed them to revise all of the Reconstruction era, as well as all the reasons and facts around why things are the way they are, the idea that black people were happy and all this nonsense. So that is the crux of why there is this history the way it is. Eurocentrism is just the concept of only focusing on the things that you've done within your creed, and in doing that, they have the audacity to say they're the only ones that have done anything successful, that have made successful societies, this, and that. You don't acknowledge, and there's actually like even with things like Uncle Tom's Cabin, like the literally already a negative thing for the most part. They were mad that it was too positive about black people then. So in what world are you actually trying to listen to and take any advice and knowledge from the philosophers, the engineers, the civilizations of these other foreign lands like India, like Asia, like Africa? Because there's plenty of philosophers, there's plenty of innovations and things that have came directly from them. The Silk Road attributed it to them. And if we weren't doing things like revising history all the time and saying that we were the ones that took that role, you would know that a lot more of these things that America takes credit for actually did come from the contributions of others. It's absurd, the level of denial. Like denial really isn't even a strong enough word to describe the stuff that we're dealing with, and it's most of America because the propaganda is so good. And I don't mean most of white America. I mean like if you're Asian, if you're Middle Eastern, if you're Indian, if you're black, if you don't have the history because it was so well kept, you probably agree not that you are okay with these things, but you probably think that that is the history. And that's the problem. And that's why my solution is awareness. And that's a dangerous thing for some. But at the end of the day, I'm not somebody who's coming in with the angle of let's get aware and then let's try to do some damage to the world. I'm genuinely saying togetherness is important. If segregation is important, then we need to just have the ability to do that too. But at the end of the day, we are not just going to be getting at each other's necks and letting this divide get to the point where we have a end of world situation. Because I would like to have children. I would like to make sure that the children that are already born have a good life, unlike the people who are at the top. And those people at the top are very much not my people. So the blame is not on me for that. It's not on us. If you want to learn about that same sabotaging nature that I was talking about in the global sense, when I describe the word hegemony, it just kind of means like controlling other nations and stuff, like whether it be covert or not. Look at the clandestine actions of like the FBI and a couple other organizations, that CIA, I believe. Like there is just very well documented things of like either overthrowing nations, sabotaging and destroying assets and stuff, so you kind of hinder and cripple a place. Intentional wars that you can just extract things from where you didn't actually have any real conflict to justify, like the Banana Republic type situations. There's a bunch of case studies that you can look into on that, and I'm not going to cover that in this episode, but if you're interested, let me know. This is an area that I explore in journalism, so I could go a lot further in that too. Another example of a historic precedent would be the move bombing in 1985, where there was a little there was a community or like a small group of people who were actually kind of annoying the community in the sense that they were trying to get certain things passed for Africa. I forgot what the exact policies were, but they would like have like megaphones at night, and they would try to. It was like this activist thing that was going over the top. The black community was calling, trying to get some sort of resolution, get these guys to kind of settle down. And what they did instead was they had helicopters drop bombs and firebomb the city or that little town, killing innocent people as well as destroying the homes of a couple, like a good number of innocent people as well, arresting people unjust that weren't guilty, and then just moving on like it wasn't a thing. I don't think anybody got a home at they didn't like file a suit and get a property back for it or anything, money. So this type of stuff is something that people would go, oh yeah, well, I mean, these people were bad. Or I'm talking about specifically the conservatives, not all the good-hearted people. But like the type of conservative I'm talking about would go, yeah, these people were bad. They needed to get handled, and that's what the government decided to do. You called for help, and you needed the help clearly, so we gave you the help. Is that not perfect? Some people lost their lives, so be it. During the same time, the KKK was doing constant cross burnings, fire bombings, and there were still a few examples of like big protests and stuff where they would go to like a black community, or they would go to like a integrating community and kind of show their distaste. If the areas where the KKK and so on were kind of being as destructive to the community as they were, and then the response was to bomb the location, the KKK is actually a hate group that actually murders. The move bombing situation was not about actual murderers at all. So people will just the words, if the police did the same thing, that would infuriate the conservative. The concept of this hate group that the government has illegal and it should be handling with the same utmost of the authority, right? They wouldn't even consider trying to do anything to harm anybody, even in that group, let alone bombing it like and hurting innocents in the community and then still not funding and providing anything for them. They wouldn't even bomb that group in the woods alone. So that shows a clear difference in the judicial practices. And when you want to see a trace of how the people today still kind of are and would fall into the roles that they were in back in the day, that's all you need to do. Because if somebody who is going, yeah, I mean, the move bombing, I mean, it made sense because back then that's what happened and so on. But if you get infuriated by even just the concept of it happening to a more troubling community that was actually a serious big threat to the town that they were in, if that's the level of differential that you have in your morality and in your judicial fairness, then it's clear that if you existed back then, exactly what role you would be in. And you like it's the fact that I need to explain this to any degree further is just a part of that issue, because I don't think I'm going to be changing the perspective of a single person, or many people should I say, who already are on that far side. These are the things that people do, and you would critique the black people who do this fairly, who try to like skate away and ignore all the crime and stuff that they're very real. Like, you can't just skate away from the issue. So you can address, yes, there are big issues. You can also give a justification or a reason for it. For the black community, it would be the things that caused it, specifically all the things I talked about earlier. And then for the white community, if you wanted to be that fair racist, then the approach would just be to say, you know, we think we're the best. We've clearly shown that we can dominate, and we will kind of keep that going. It's survival of the fittest, so on and so forth. And it's a competition. But if they say that, then the response will be to start competing and seeing it in that same light. So that's why they can't just be that honest, and they manipulate and they, you know, do as they do. So these are the factors that go around the perspectives of the American creed. So now I'm going to kind of show the history and how we went from not being like established as a nation to the degree that we are today, and then how we built up, then actually provided for our citizens to build the middle class and make our nation as great as it is. And then how we are since and now kind of shut down or kind of trying to extract and kind of close that door, even for the middle class, to kind of recreate this upper lower class divide where they're just kind of siphoning all the funds to the top. And if you want to learn a little bit more, because I do have an entire article where I cover the history of race in America and the perspectives that I'm describing in this episode, I'm going to show my article. So just kind of scroll down so you can see some of like the major pointers if you do want to like pause and read into that. And then on top of it, I have resources that you're going to see here where if you want to learn a lot more than what I even covered, this is something where, as I described in a previous episode, I probably only know about, if I'm lucky, 30% of all the available knowledge that there is to know. And then on top of that, that knowledge, all the available knowledge that there is to know is probably a tenth of all the knowledge that has been lost, not recorded, properly co-opted to the point of erasure, and so on. So there's just an endless amount of layers and variables that you will never be able to get to the end of. But this is going to be pretty much a college course on the history of America, perspectives, and what this is really a foundation for what critical race theory should be, if there's going to be that. But I actually disagree with critical race theory, and I think it should just be revised to civics class, because the issue with critical race theory is those co-opters that I was talking about who discredit a point. Critical race theory does a little bit too much, and I'm talking about the way it's practiced, not just the term and like the concept, but it does too much to actually be condemning and like negative. And the arguments that people would make about why we should lie about our nation and not be truthful is that they literally will say verbally that we fear that if we actually are teaching the people the truth about America, then they're not going to appreciate it and be as patriotic, which is a fault of your own. It's disgusting that that's like the reason. Like if you think about another culture doing that, like a China, that's the exact thing that you would critique. But regardless, the point is the information that needs to be educated can come from an angle where you're not actually being negative. You can actually tell the history of America through the lens of the white liberal and progressive, and you would actually be able to make it like a power positive story where white people aren't necessarily being seen as negative in the literature. You know what you're fighting against. And for people who pat themselves on the back because there is white conservative or white progressive doing good in that time, these are the same people who actually would, if you're doing that, you're probably mad that they are doing it to begin with, as far as the conservative goes. Like you see that same perspective when you go, oh, well, there's black presidents now, so why are you still, oh, there's black doctors now, so why are you, every opportunity is now available to you, so why are you still complaining? Why is it still an issue? That is the dumbest point ever, because it's something that happens to individuals. Like tokenism has always been a thing, and so has having a freeman or a house or a house Negro. Like that is not a justification for what is actually real, and that's that same like walking around the issue that I'm discussing, where it's like, okay, I hear your point. Now let's put that aside. Let's talk about what they were fighting and who killed them and what was the reason why they were in the situation that they were in. And do you understand? Did it eventually help, or did it end up being co-opted and destroyed? And who did that? Oh, no other color was associated with this. But for some reason, the lamb-like nature to appreciate the high standards of the people who did do good tend to come from the people who are mad and wish that they never existed or did the things that they did. Like the civil rights people, they go, oh man, there's people who are out getting hosed by dogs. I'm so proud. Or these guys are so brave. But they also go, I wish that the civil rights movement didn't happen, because now we have to do what we deal with, whether you actually drank the Kool-Aid or worse, poured the Kool-Aid. The people who are patting themselves on the back are the least deserving of doing so in many cases when you're talking about that conservative perspective. So to kind of give like the quickest rundown that I can on American history from the beginning to about when things got a little bit more like common knowledge. Pretty much like in the beginning, it was just like Spain and Britain and a couple other countries that came over all together. This was never just like one nation came and just dominated. It was all the superpowers coming and dividing and conquering, coming into unit and then just breaking everybody else apart. So in doing that, they were able to eventually conquer and get to a point where they had established a good bit of the nation. And because a lot of farming and things like that was something that was done in by the Native Americans, So they didn't have to do the amount of clearing of land to try to make properties. They didn't have to do the same amount of trying to set up for farming and things like that, which made it that much easier for the Europeans that arrived to be able to populate such a vast land. And in doing so, because they came with diseases and things that the Native Americans weren't exposed to, all it took was a little bit of disease that played an enormous part, and a lot of disgusting, like horrendous. When you talk about savages, the idea that that gets attributed to like people who came over, saw people in land disputes, said that they were going to steal all of their land after being given kindnesses in many cases, treaties and like proper established like diplomacy with these people, broke all the rules, did horrendous things to the people, kicked them out across countries, and I mean, made them walk across the entire nation in many cases, and then really, if not eradicating them, put them in little camps where they would be really unable to sustain themselves successfully, destroyed the one thing that they cared about, which was the environment and the globe, and like the safety of like sustainability and all these things. From like the bison was the issue. Now we're talking about the world ending down here. But yeah, so like that was the origin to kind of getting things going. And then in like the 1600s, I think maybe even like, I know if I'm not mistaken, in 1712, Willie Lynch made his letter for like the making of a slave. And this was actually like a speech given that was like written down, but that became like the L wording of people. Like that became like the blueprint for slavery in America. So slaves had been there since this some period within the 1600s, but I forget exactly when. So slaves have been there for just about as long as pretty much the start of the nation, as far as it being really established as like colonies and things of that nature. And then on top of that, the way that America kind of uplifted its lower class in the beginning was essentially to just go about giving opportunity, because they needed to actually extract either the wealth or to be able to kind of build out the nation. So you would have things like homesteading, which means if you just go to a random plot of land, you can get that land for free if you just build a property on it and stay in that property for a certain period of time. So think about how much property value is raised today. Think of like within 100 years, 200 years. Bring that back to that point. That's what old money means. And then there's people who tap into oil because that's what it is when you're in a new place. Like Texas has a lot of oil. Other places have mining things. Certain places are really good with agriculture. And then when it comes to agriculture, now that people have this homesteading situation where they have a farm, they have all these things, but they aren't competent. They don't know how to actually do it because they were just farmers coming from a poorer environment. They don't know how to do any mass production of anything. They don't have certain tools and skills. So they would have farming agents that come and educate those who and help those who are on the lower side of being able to get financially solvent through this method, and who just need that education, right? So these two things, or three things, are pretty much the root of how people were making money in the early days, tied with like little random excursions along the way, like the Gold Coast or the Gold Rush, and all the many ways that like, oh, we discovered ways to make money here, we discovered ways to make money there. But farming subsidies, even to where they told farmers not to grow and they would pay them for that. So these people were very much assisted. It's not like they picked themselves up from their bootstraps and they didn't have help. They got a big amount of help, more help than probably any other nation does currently. Even like Nigeria gives free college education to all its citizens that are able to. And that being said, that's not even the level of help that we're talking about. They held their hands, gave them the actual success to begin with. It's the difference from getting the tools and then having you start a business and try to become successful and then get a property, to giving you the property, giving you the business, teaching you how to run the business, and then even giving you workers. So like, it's not even something that you can say people did as like some like, oh, the prideful thing that people like to say. And all of this is still barring most of Europe, because Europe didn't really come to the Americas until like the 1800s to the 1900s. So this is like just like Spain, Portugal, Britain, and maybe like a little bit of some other like France and things like that. So when it comes to these things, like the only people that were in America at the time, when you get up to about the 1600s, were those people. Now 1600s, you get slavery. So black people started coming in. We've been here for this long. Me being somebody who's a descendant of a slave, and I have no like, you know this because you don't have any ties or connection to your lineage. I can't trace it back. as they did in the system. If you study Willie Lynch, you would learn that it is an intentional thing to erase the history and make a new race in that sense. So black people are almost a fully different subset from African in the sense that they like. There's always like a little bit of like white in you, probably because of the practices in the past and all these other things. So we're almost like our erasure to like any concept of what our prior religion, language would be, any of the things that would give you the same level of understanding. And because of that, you have to rely on the education that they give. You have to rely on the opportunity that they give. And if you're going to be self-sufficient, then you have to get the location to do that and not have it be sabotaged, which was never a thing in America, even really until like 1980. But you could say 60, but it was really continuing to be sabotaged and all the other things, and I'll describe that along the way. So when it came to the populace, it's not like a lot of the white people who, like, let's say conservatives, who felt that the world was like the manifest destiny applied to them. They weren't even there until the late 1800s and like the mid 18 to 1900s. Like they didn't have like their mass migration from Europe until slavery was getting to the point where they knew they would end it. And to get a bunch of extra labor, like a couple companies, if I'm not mistaken, like devised the concept of the American dream as like a marketing ploy to get everybody to kind of come who is coming from a poor environment for cheap labor for the private, like to kind of be like the sharecroppers and all the things that the slave owners are no longer using slaves to get done. And you would have indentured servants because people would be coming in plights. So the reason why the Irish were the indentured servants more than any other people, or why you hear that and not necessarily like the Italians and stuff, is because they had the potato famine, which Europe actually played a big role in, because the like Britain was deciding not to import to them or export to them. They allowed them to suffer because they were kind of like the lower class citizens to Europe or to Great Britain. So that being said, there was a bunch of people suffering greatly, eating like bread that they had to use drywall to just get enough to make dough with. So people were suffering immensely. They all were able to come over to Americas, where they would be then put into like harsh work as like a immigrant or as a indentured servant, where indentured servitude is not like slavery. So the idea that people like conflate the two and try to compare black slavery, cattle slavery, to what is essentially just working in a situation where you're in debt, so you can't really buy yourself out or just go and work for another company because you have to pay off that debt. And then when you do get off, you move and you become successful, but you can also buy yourself out, which is, and you're also not being beaten and abused in any of the same degree and so on and so forth. Black slavery was generational. They would have you have children so that the children could be slaves. They would actually make sure that you were being beaten and like your humanity was removed. It was illegal to read and try to uplift yourself. It was like the we were talking about medieval. The only people, or the only time that you can really think of a similar level of horrors that were going on as far as human depravity is the medieval era. The medieval era, when it came to things like the punishments you would have, like all the different things that they would do, that was stuff that was being done for fun in the, like the royal courts would do this stuff. That was being done for fun in that same exact kind of mindset, but just in from poor people who just got their opportunity, or from the people who were there prior, who were like the British and so on and so forth. These were pretty much the same level of deprived people that if it was another culture doing this stuff, you would see it as far worse. These things are far worse than the things that Native Americans were doing to each other, and they are far worse than things that you can see in Africa or any other place of conflict that people would complain so heavily about. So some of the worst things that have been done in human society in general are between the medieval era and the slavery period, and they write away that stuff like it really is not a big deal, and that it didn't have any effect. Get up, so now you're free, so whatever, keep moving. Like it's absurd to a level that's unimaginable. But regardless, so that was the situation that you would deal with as a indentured servant if you were Irish, and then as any immigrant or anybody who was poor, you were getting the same kind of experience of like, oh, they're going to taint our culture, they're going to destroy the country if we give them opportunity. Like for instance, the Polish, they would call them Polacks, and they would have issue with the fact that they were getting jobs and taking quality jobs. I think in dentists and being a doctor and things like that. You see that same energy manifested with like Indians and Nigerians and all these other things, and when in like Asians in colleges and stuff like that. When it comes to the energy that people use to write off the white experience, is like, yes, everybody went through it, so what have you. The thing that you need to distinguish is that the people who went through it in the European sphere went through it when it got to a point where they wanted to make sure that the number of the white population was higher than the number of like any minorities, because they were letting people from other places come in too. That's why they started going, oh, you know what? Italians that we used to not call American, now you're considered American too, and now you're considered white, because before they weren't even considered white. They were trying to keep them out of that category, even though I'm sure they were taking all the accolades from Rome. Same thing goes with Greece and so many other places where you have the audacity to write off, but still take all the appreciation from their stuff. And that's the same stuff that we complain about when it came to like that appropriation angle, where you literally lie about the origins of, because that's where democracy came from. That's where we got the Senate and all this stuff. And then you say that they're not good and they should be treated poorly. They're violent and so on and so forth. And when it's time, you give them opportunity. You don't abuse them and treat them horribly. And wow, they actually cannot be violent if not being abused through violence. Like, you know what I mean? So if you just put it in the same context where the people who were suffered, the black people, everybody else, when they actually got opportunity at the same time, which would be like the 1920s, I'll get to that in a second, when the middle class was formed, if they were given the same opportunities in 2 generations, they would be just as good. And almost all people, when you're past a certain tax bracket, are just the same kind of like, you know, just well-educated, very like business-minded, like quality of, you know, of morality and character people. Because when you're in that environment, there is just good things going around. There's not suffering that would make you need to be this horrible person, unless you're a narcissistic person like those conservatives I was talking about. But they're great to each other, and they ignore that disgustingness to others is disgusting because it's justified. So when it comes to the perspective of the white people that did suffer in the past, they absolutely did, and it absolutely was injustices and people that were hurting on all sides. But when you need to talk about is the why and how, and the valley of difference between that is just too far for you to be even trying to call it the same thing. But pretty much it goes, is a quote that goes, when you're privileged, equality seems like oppression. So when you're used to privilege and everything is so exclusive, so made of readily available to you, they over prioritize you, whether it's colleges, whether it's funding, your community, housing, and things of that nature. You get used to that. So even if you have 90% of all the things, like whether it be like employment, like it's 90% white, whether it's the communities are 90% white, if you see as much of a 5% like decline in that, people, and this is very common, have been calling out things like, oh, white oppression and so on and so forth. Affirmative action is this, like the oppression of whites, because it's giving people what they don't receive. And the quickest way I can sum up what affirmative action is pretty much it is almost no different for the black plight than it is to, like, let's say for instance in during the World War II, the Japanese were put in internment camps, and they were taken, their finances were taken, they were like kept from their home, all their property, so on and so forth, was confiscated. When they got out, in return, each person was given $70,000 because the horror that they had to deal with, the economic issues that would come from that, the trauma for their children and so on. You would have an obvious justification for providing that type of, reparation for them. When it comes to that same exact war, the Jewish people that had to suffer through the true horrendous situation that was the Holocaust, they definitely needed to have a place to be safe, or at least they were offered that, in the sense that it's like the ultimate 40 acres and a mule. You went through this horrible thing. We're going to make sure that you guys are set now so that you can do better and be self-sufficient. So they were given an entire nation, which was done very strategically to also kind of help with the Western power and make sure that you had like a Western civilization in the Middle East and all of these other things for geopolitical advantages. but this is where their original home was, so it's fair to have made that the decision that you would consider. So, I mean, I'm not going to mention anything on like the Israel-Palestine situation. It's the Western world has been corrupt with the things that they have done for all of their history. Them trying to rectify it in a way where they're giving the Jewish people a land. Obviously, they're going to be corrupt and horrible in the way that they go about it. So they just kind of erase people from the area, kick people out, and you end up in a very similar, like, oppressive situation that we see even in the Black community, as far as like ghettos and slums, suppression of like access, what redlining would be, to the inability to bring things like food and medicine and stuff of quality into the certain communities. So this is like the Western play of like how you kind of go about this kind of a thing of suppressing power and like absorbing and making sure that you have this level of control, while also kind of putting it in a nice like humanitarian-esque vibe of like, we're just trying to do good in the world. We are the righteous. How could you critique this, right? So the Jewish plight, they were given a nation in return for their suffrage, and that nation, not just solely alone from the Jewish people, but like through the Western powers supporting and backing it, they were able to become what it is today. And when it comes to the Asian Americans, so the internment camps will be the best case. And when the Japanese were interned, when they were officially released, they were given $70,000 per person, as they rightfully should have, as reparations for the suffrage that they were put through during the World War, and in McCarthyism and all this stuff. So when you went through things like this, it's very obvious that we understand the value of providing, like doing right by the people that we've done wrong by. If the government destroys a person's property, they're probably going to be, even if it needs to be sued, they're still going to be liable for repairing or paying for either a new place or what have you. It's the difference between eminent domain, where we get you we buy your house and we get you a better place, or just kicking you out of your land and just telling you you're now homeless, or start from the beginning again. And that is pretty much what the Black experience had been. And when they did consider affirmative action, instead of providing the actual same extent of value to the individuals and it's not about slavery, it's about specifically the people who lost their homes through the KKK, which is also associated in many ways with the government. You can look at the cases with the policing and things like, the Philadelphia bombing of '85. There's a bunch of different drown towns and firebomb places that were very successful. People act like there was never Black successful, places that were self-sufficient and doing well. Like Manhattan, Central Park is one, Lake Lanier is one, Tulsa, Oklahoma, I believe Tulsa is one, I believe. Yes, that's the big, the Tulsa massacre was the big case for that. That was the biggest Black Wall Street. When it comes to the amount of times that people have had to build themselves up from nothing, it has never ended. There was actually a small period right before Lincoln's assassination where they actually did provide some level of property to Black homeowners, or they allowed Black homeowners to become that. And then the next president came in, erased all of that stuff. And now those people who lost out on property that they owned kind of started establishing and farming on. These are all cases and case studies of people who are alive today even. Like, we're not talking about things that happen, oh, you're dead, so you're trying to get something from great-grandparents. No, we're talking about 60s. We're talking about people who are still alive. And we're talking about children that were in those households that lost maybe a breadwinner because they were murdered in certain cases. And then on top of that, they had their home burned and then everything erased from them. So when it comes to things like reparations, it's not about slavery. It's about the direct things that were done after that, the lack of judicial practices that would have been supposed to be holding these things to account. And in a situation where there's a judicial error, then you're supposed to be able to sue and be paid for that. Like, we will let a prisoner who was falsely arrested get millions because he was falsely arrested. And you understand the logic of that. You know that if somebody had a poor judicial practice and proceeding that ended up hurting their job and their ability to do what have you, then there would be some sort of judicial practice for that, where you would be able to get some sort of compensation, reparation, what have you. The fact that they don't see it as something that they would even consider for a plight that's probably one of the most egregious and long-lasting in America, not talking about even just slavery, but specifically everything post, that is just obvious signs of either the fear of trying to uplift the Black community because you want to keep them down so that you don't have any either competition or like fear of like repercussions because of all the horrible things done to us. You as a culture in the European community that is so focused on we will never let this happen. They have militia groups set up to make sure that if the taxes probably go over 60%, then they will probably kind of start a riot or be ready to do certain things. If a gun law is actually passed that is too restrictive, the same people who talk about the law is the law, protect the police, and or like stand by all this stuff, they will immediately talk about annexing and taking out the police officers that come to do their legal diligence to what is not breaking the amendment, by the way, to have a well-regulated militia. So at the end of the day, it's well-regulated. So we aren't able to have full auto, and people understand that. So it's not much different to say we're going to have to put more regulations up because we've seen enough murders and mass shootings and things of that nature, specifically with mass shootings, because it's the ability to fire as many times. Now I am pro-gun to the fullest. I don't want anything to change in that, and specifically because I understand what it would do to the to those individuals. So like from my perspective, I wouldn't say that the guns need to be held and also one thing I will say also is the intention behind being able to have that gun right and the fear of that tyrannical government. I do know from a little bit of research as well as some anecdotal observations I've made that when it comes to this stuff, a lot of it is tied to the fear of like losing the majority, having another group come into power or things of that nature. And you're seeing that's why the buildup is kind of getting to where it is as it feels. So when it comes to issues like that, like it very much serves many purposes, but the government is just as much a target to these people, and specifically the hardcore conservatives that are a little bit more on the aggressive side, specifically on the lower income. These guys are constantly talking about cops being bad and oh, he's a tyrant, so on and so forth, pigs, and they have all the worst things to say if there's even the slightest offense. Like he made me pull out my ID when I legally don't have to, and I tried to say no, and you tried to lie and say I have to. That will be enough for them to say, oh no, you know what, you need to be arrested. Get this officer off the thing. He's a bad representation for police officers, so on and so forth. How many people of my kind who are just like me in terms of like, oh, we did everything right. We're not, oh, what did you do wrong? No, there's innocent people like me in mass that are being shot, murdered, and all kinds of horrible things. The Ahmaud Arbery's, there's so many other cases that I'm not able to pull up from just the top of my head. Like when it comes to these things, there's just a clear, like it's not about the actual truth. It is about the manipulation and power. And you be a good boy. You do as you are supposed to do. Stay in your place. You know that you are not supposed to step out of that bound. And then for us, it's you are supposed to be protecting and serving me. How dare you step out of your place, officer? You are a servant to me. And they will actually talk to them with that energy at times if it gets to that. So when you say like, oh, why are you being aggressive with an officer, like verbally? Why are you not cooperating? You should just handle it in court. If you actually see any clips or any content with the people who are standing their ground who are conservative or even just liberal but just doing it in the right way, all you will see is messages like, thanks for protecting your right, this is why these pigs and tyrants and so on. And then if I did the same exact thing, like literally, or even a lower bar of that thing, people will go, you should have known that you stepping out of your place. You guys always getting uppity. It's literally the same energy of you're getting too uppity. You're trying too much. You think you have the right. And that energy exists till today. It's very, very felt. The officers tend to also be the ones with that energy. And as somebody who's been pulled over for nonsense and is the most submissive when I was younger, and now just the most like cordial, like it doesn't matter how good you are, and they will just look for nonsense and get you for nonsense. And it's not something that it's like, oh, well, what did you do? You know darn well. Let's stop playing stupid. And I know that this little smiley, like acting like, oh, but why just do it though? That's the energy that these guys come with, and that is a problem. But to extend an olive branch to the conservatives, I will also add that when it comes to being in that position where you've always been privileged, you are in a situation where you're seeing the rest of the world get rights and opportunities and privileges in a time where you're seeing yours reduce, not by virtue of it necessarily being diminished, but in the sense that you're seeing others getting involved as well. And when you see that, you go, whoa, this is supposed to be exclusive. This country club is supposed to be ours. So it's like a breach, and that undesirables mindset is something that never died. The whole, like pretty much all the propaganda and all the ideals that people would have had 200 years ago, 100 years ago, in the 60s still exist today to the fullest extent. It's just that legalese makes it wrapped around a nice little bow so that you can have a little justification for it, or that people just have to hide it because it's not as publicly acceptable to discuss out loud. It really does ring true, and it's so noticeable and concerning. The only issue now is that it's not something that you guys can do legally. So what you do is it's legal. It's outsourcing of that same practice. So you can, and this is something you saw with Karen, you can call unjustly, and because officers will clearly believe the Caucasian person, and I'll show another example of this in the clips that I'm going to record in the little reaction video. But because people will over prioritize the word of the Western world over like a black person, what you'll do is you can just lie and say some crazy stuff, and when the police officer comes, they'll probably harm me, they'll arrest me, they'll do crazy things even if it's unjust. And you'll say that's not real and stuff like that. Watch the reaction video if you care to see it. These things are just rooted in true evil, have not left us to any degree, and legalese and like the changing of wording and the excuses around it have allowed the same things to continue to this day. So yes, racism is real. Yes, if you are falling into the camp that I'm describing in certain areas, you are the one who is immoral. And when it comes to understanding the perspective of, like, let's say a liberal white person who still feels that they're in a lower position because other people are getting opportunity and equality, I do actually know where you're coming from if you are ignoring the justifications for why there should absolutely be that. Because you're used to a world where you used to say to yourself, oh, everybody's treated equal and everybody has the same right. Everybody else is just squandering it. So now we're lifting them up even though they're squandering what they have. So we're doing more for them than what we would have done for the others. But that's not the history. So in getting farming, or in getting slaves, that became pretty much the financial capital of America to a large degree, in the selling and trading, in the ability to get free labor and all these other factors. So in the time of slavery, think about it like this. Instead of having anybody pay taxes, you could have everybody pay 10% taxes, or you can have one group of people that is 10% of the population paying 100% in tax, which is essentially slave labor. And in doing so, everybody else gets to live pretty much rent-free, and in many cases, without even having to work. So like it sets it up to where we were the genuine backbone for what allowed for America to kind of get the financial backing that it did and start for it to kind of begin. And then in growing, we like kind of were the imports and exports from cotton and all these other factors. We were the reason why when it became legal to actually use when slavery ended, we would actually still be taking slave contracts and then prison contracts through the industrial contracting. So businesses would be hiring slaves, and then businesses would be hiring, prison workers. So even past slavery, the same practices continued. And now you get to the point where we're in the 1920s, And in the 1920s is when they actually kind of started to build the middle class. So with a couple different factors, from margin trading. So in margin trading is pretty much just you would get a loan where you'd be able to, get invested into the stock market. Because back before you couldn't just, it wasn't like you can get fractional stocks. Like I get a percentage of one share, which is how it works now. So a lot of people can get in without having as much money. Back then you needed to buy the whole share. And I don't know if you know the stock market too well, but let's say like with Amazon, it's actually like 300 a share or what have you. Now we can only just put $20 in and still be in an Amazon share. Before you would just have to have that, and sometimes you would even need to get several stocks in order to get invested. So just that quick little rundown for those who don't know the stock market. So in the stock market, pretty much if you can get more money than what you actually put in, and the stock market is going up because everybody is kind of gaming the system, or they have everybody gaming the system because they're giving them these loans out knowing it's going to crash and be artificial. What it does is it makes it so that pretty much overnight or in a very brief period of time, a lot of people who put their money into the market were able to kind of uplift themselves, make a lot of funds, whether that meant starting a business, trying to invest in a home, because at the same time, the Federal Housing Administration started making it to where you could actually get properties. And in doing that, you would actually be able to go and get the same property subsidized because they wanted to support building up the middle class. You would get it subsidized for like $10,000. And if you can just get some loans that are going up in value to the degree that it would, you can get that done pretty quick. It's not even about a generation. It's about a couple of years, right? So this allowed for like an enormous amount of wealth to kind of immediately begin. On top of that, then you get into things like Social Securities and the GI Bill, the Green New Deal, all these amazing things that were designed to kind of really provide a social safety net, all the things that you would need to be successful once again, and to kind of really reinvest and build that middle class in America. It's also incredible for recruiting, and in doing that, we kind of made it to where now that we have a bunch of people who are, and specifically European people, who are making an ungodly amount of money compared to what they used to, they could send their families and they can come in mass and they can, do all kinds of things to build up their communities, and kind of the promise that you just need to be insular and America first in the way that you kind of handle, if you're like trying to be positive about the minority issues and things like that. Nope, you can get kicked right out of that group. So you have to kind of toe the line, and assimilate to a big degree. So now we can cut to like a little bit before like the 60s, and what you start to get is when people start to hear that there's going to be like opportunity for everybody, and that they're going to start allowing for Black people to have the levels of freedom that was fought for. And I will discuss that in another episode because I don't want to spend too much time on this, because there's so much to unpack about the civil rights era. But when it comes to that, because of the fear that it came with like Black people getting freedoms and things of that nature, white flight became a thing. The end of segregation was something that people were very much unokay with. So the Federal Housing Administration made it to where they were able to start selling homes, and they would build homes away from communities. That's why the Midwest and all these things were kind of built out the way they are. So you would just have homes for like $10,000. You'd have subsidies to get the homes, and the community would be already kind of set up and waiting for you. And they kind of made it to where all the things I discussed before, you should have the funds to do that. Even on top of the things of like college was, and schooling was free before or discounted through subsidies. When it came to like opportunities, like things that you would need a degree for now, you can kind of just say, hey, I'm looking to get started, and you can get in there. These aren't things that exist, and they ended because others started getting that opportunity. So they said, nope, we can't do this. White flight meant that they started to move away from certain communities. And the funny thing is that they still build their communities, or like, for instance, if you're in a suburb, they need to have it around the Black community and or minority communities for some reason. It does extract the wealth from it because you have to go to the shops and things like that. So it builds up your tax base while siphoning from the others, plus a bunch of other things. And also you get a cheaper property if you're building that property in an area that's close to a red line zone, which is going to be pretty much, we aren't able to build a home, we aren't able to buy a home, we aren't able to start businesses easily. It's harder to get loans or to be able to sell to the people in that area. So they shoot us in the foot, so that even if we are successful and we don't need loans, it's still a hard time to be successful in America. And for you guys at the same period, you were actually being given all the tools that needed to, one, get away from us, but also do very well. And then in doing that, you kind of made it to where you could start to charge a lot for things that would allow for segregation to continue in the form of pricing people out. So that's de facto and de jure segregation. And I actually am going to discuss that in another episode as well. But pretty much to quickly sum it up, it is just the concept of we're going to set up structures that are kind of like, once again, as I said, that legalese thing, keeping the same systems in play, but with a hidden ability to do so, like a covert mean. And the same thing goes with the jury, except the jury is just straight up, it's in the law. And that you saw that a lot in the South, where like the black codes, there's a lot to the black codes. So I'm going to discuss that too. You can look into it, or you can follow the rest of my content and you'll start to learn about it. And yeah, so they kept a lot of things suppressed so you would not be able to be successful, not to mention the hate crimes, the police brutality. After you got through all of the hardship that came with that, they started to burn and like drown all of the cities that were very successful. So they had the people. This is where revisionism gets the most disgusting, is that they'll say that black societies have never been successful, never self-sufficient, so on and so forth. The Black Panthers was not just some hate group. They were providing food and medical services. They had medical centers and all kinds of things to help the community. So that was sustaining people on the lowest form of economic situations. Now, on the higher form, there was many bustling and successful black communities. There was Black Wall Streets in a couple different areas. They bombed, burned, and just all kinds of riots and all these horrible things in these communities, domestic terrorism and all this. And in doing that, like you now, if you want to learn about it, you can look at places like Central Park was once a black community. Lake Lanier, there is Tulsa, Oklahoma is the biggest Black Wall Street to my knowledge that was burned down. And so they erase all the history in a time where people were still alive to know the truth. They act like we never had any ability to be successful to begin with. And then on top of it, now they still hinder us and say the reason why we're failing is because we can't pick ourselves up from our bootstraps and be successful. So why should we get our just due reparations? And I'm not even saying reparations need to be provided to all, like it's really specifically if you lost land, just like any other place, specifically to the government's actions, just like any other individual in society in that same period of time, you would be entitled to sue or to just receive compensation for that in order to buy a new one. That's the only thing that I would say needs to be addressed. And that is not something that people are okay with. And that is absurd when you know that this, down to a criminal, the same laws apply, and you would understand it in that sense. We're talking about innocent people who are successful business owners who lost millions of dollars in appreciation and assets because of the fact, and this is like down to me, like my grandfather did not get in a GI Bill. Like, and then on top of this, to kind of do that same thing where I mentioned where they sabotage and intentionally hinder and destroy communities and things like that to kind of discredit. So when it came to this, during white flight, the communities that were doing good and being successful, when black people would start to move in, real estate agents would come in, tell them the black people are coming in, you need to sell your house now, it's going to be reduced for a large amount of money. And then in doing that, they would, when black people were able to get in, they would upsell the price to a black person by a lot. They started to buy out all the properties and then put up sublets and places that you can't own. And then they would bus in a bunch of people who are, on the more dangerous side so that the policing would be justifiable. In the moment where that occurred, when they started to kick people out and white flight began, all the infrastructure left, all the businesses and so on. So even if you purchased a home, you went through all that, you got through the hell, you fought through all the protests that came, the cross burnings and what have you, you still don't have a appreciating asset to give your child when you pass because of the fact that they kind of reduced the value in the community. And what that did is make it to where white people who once lived in those communities, when they come back and see just a desolate, disgusting, just broken down wasteland, essentially, in the form of the ghettos that they create. And a ghetto, if you study it, it's like an intentional thing built to like create these negative experiences for people to justify their situation and also to keep them down. So when you have that, you pretty much make it to where the apathetic or those who are on the side of like our people would start to go, oh, you know what, maybe they are the issue and so on. And when we try to go and get reparations and sort of get a correction for the issue, you go, no, but look what you did to this area. And that is the crux of why there is just an enormous disparity. So at the time where people are claiming pick yourself up from your bootstraps, one part of society is getting unprecedented levels of aid and opportunity, to the likes of which, when you talk about a handout, oh my God, there's no such thing as a bigger handout than what was provided between the 1920s and the 1950s. And then what we were given was knockdown after knockdown and reduction and death and torture and pain and trials and suffrage, and we still overcome, and we still have the right mindset. This is still the type of character that we are. When people critique Black people, they love to ignore the existence of all the hundreds of millions that are just not what you're trying to describe. They say, why can't Black people work together? Why can't Black people be this? And why are they having this issue? Why are they inherently violent? You're talking to me, and people say this stuff. I have a family of people who are just like me. I have hundreds of friends that are just like me. As an event photographer, I've met literally tens of thousands of people like me or better. And I haven't met, and also like on the internet, there's a million more. And then when you're even in the inner city, there's plenty of super incredible human beings, even who've done horrible things, because the fortitude that they have in their mind, and it's really way less victim mentality than you would think. It really is that energy of that grandma and like that. It's okay, baby. We got it. Don't you stress. Don't you let them control you. Nothing's going to take my morality from me. Hate is not a thing that will exist in my heart. We shall overcome. That is the root of what I know Black culture to be. And yes, there is the opposite in the same way as white culture. Like, I hate when people act like it's this one thing that doesn't exist in all of human nature. But the point is, we are not some like low level thing that is like being bad. This is who we are. And we get written off and assumed to be bad. So yes, you generalize to the point where you might, if I don't talk to you, I'm in the same group. and even if I do talk to you, you're still probably going, okay, I'm going to wait and see if he has a little something bad going on in him. He just hasn't shown his butt yet. This is the type of shit we're talking about. So it's like, you don't have the ability to have a competent conversation because it's so rooted in either trying to justify the fear that you have or in the actions that we're taking. Because it's one thing to say, oh, you had to do all this to people who were actually bad. What would your response be if you actually admitted the fact that back in the day, people were more passive and more kind because they were closer to that submissive slavery-ass era time, that they were a lot closer to me and they were getting treated like crap? Like, you would have, if you had the same understanding that the slaves that were going through that stuff weren't this bad thing you're trying to describe, and instead were like characters like myself, and you still have the justification that this should be not only done but continued internally, you couldn't deny your disgusting nature. Do you understand? So this is the nature of the beast, and there is a real beast in the American creed, and it's not the Black community. We have reasons why there is the crime, why there is the this. But for the people who go, why is it this way? All you ever had to do was grab a book. It was right there for you, but you're not trying to get the answer. You're trying to push down and put down and make people, you're trying to spread you're trying to pour the Kool-Aid for others. You're trying to be that merchant for propaganda. And that is unforgivable. But if you don't know, now you know. And if you're changing, great. But if you still have the same opinion, you're now as guilty as watching me get the same treatment and going, yeah, but what did he do? Because that is the type of shit that I've had happen and experience and be told. And the idea that people say that, even knowing your character, it shows just the lack of, it's a denial to a point that is unreal. And that's why whitewashing is a term, because it is this insidious inability to address any flaw that may possibly exist in your creed. And then at the end of the day, you think you're lamb-like. So that would be a run of Black and white history up until the civil rights movement, right? So in the same time, when it came to the minorities, what they were experiencing was something a little bit similar to what, like, let's say the Polish or things of that nature would experience, where if they were giving jobs and they were doing everything right, like for instance, you'll see a lot of propaganda toward the Asian community. If you just type in like propaganda, and all the things that you see about Hispanics today was attributed to people who were doing all the right things, killing it more than you, and they were getting the job out of nothing more than higher competence and skill level and ability. It's not like it was undeniable. It was not like it was some handout that was given to them at that time. You know that wasn't the case. So it's the idea that you will suppress and limit and say that no opportunities need to be made for us when you have 90% of it, if not more at the time. And then when we try to say, let's get at least some opportunity for ourselves as well, and that might mean making a 2%, 5, 10%. And if I'm being honest, it could be 20% level of window for us to kind of get that same opportunity, because that's what equality is. Then yes, and that's not even equality, 20%, but we're being decent in the sense that we know we're dealing with demons when it comes to the stuff we're trying to get changed. But yes, there are some Baphomets that we have to deal with in this environment, and the way that the entire Western world is feeling about the pressures of the elite today should give you the context for how we feel, because you aren't dealing with anything compared to even what I'm dealing with today. Like just from like the level of extra pressures, because I deal with everything that you guys would deal with. People make the argument, oh, there's like there's white people who are suffering, drug addiction, so on and so forth. That same archetype exists for Black people, for minorities, plus all the other things, the general hate that goes around your entire creed, all the many factors that go into that. So it's not something that is even apples to oranges. This is apples to trees. Like it's not even comparable. When it comes to like Spanish people and things of that nature, a lot of the things that they dealt with kind of came from dealing with it in the Caribbean, in like South America and so on. Because Spain, like as I said, Spain was one of the first people. Spain came, the Dutch went to the Caribbean and so on and so forth, and they kind of colonized that area. So you still have a lot of like direct descendants from Black and white mixing in a kind of Aztec environment. So that's why you have like darker and lighter like Spaniards. And when it comes to that, the level of divide is exactly the same as in America, in the sense that like the self-loathing, like say Dominicans have a big thing with not wanting to identify with being Black. And then when it comes to other cultures and creeds, like there is just an enormous level of inability to have unity because we've been pitted against each other, not within ourselves, but when we're looking at these two creeds trying to come together. And that's exactly what they want, because they do fear the union of anything of that nature. And the issue is that they wouldn't have anything to worry about if they just stopped treating people poorly. I don't think any Black people would be trying to do any sort of like horrible thing if, when in 1920s people were given opportunity, they just said, okay, we're going to stop being the horrible people that we are. We're going to treat people right. And not even by arresting all the horrible people that did what they did in the past, like how the German nation did with the Nazis, which is what makes you more comfortable with moving on. That if they at least gave us the opportunity, we would actually be able to have some pride in the nation. That I still do. For those that don't, we would still have pride in the nation, and we would be able to stand by and support what's going on going forward. The fear of even having us have the ability to get there is why we're being continually snuffed, and that is the problem. And when it comes with generalizing, I don't really condemn generalizing too much on face value, because it is a human nature thing. But what I do condemn is having incongruencies in your own morality. So in that same conservative sphere that I'm referring to, it's very common to say that you shouldn't generalize, so on and so forth. When people say that white people are racist en masse, I would say that's completely wrong as well. As I said, there's people who've died for this stuff. But at the same time, if you can see the wrong with generalizing there, and yet people justify the generalization to the point of saying maybe we need to get rid of all the people of certain creeds, you could not be more disgustingly hypocritical and blind to reason. So that is the stuff that is the most maddening. And to kind of give like a real example of that, what I'll do is I'll cover Liam Neeson, because he actually had a time where I think a friend of his had an SA situation with a Black man, And he said, and this is a horrible thing, and he said that he almost felt that he would go out that night and just take out any black person that he saw because he felt that it was that, like, he needed to get back for what had happened. A lot of that conservative community would, and I'm talking about a lot, would be so on board with that, would be like, yes, I get where you're coming from, would have at best apathy and understanding to it, even if they don't agree, right? Now, let's reverse the order. Say any other creed said that or felt that way about the white community. And this is even with them saying that they would never do this. Liam said he was a little close. Let's say they were just like, oh, I just made this as a joke, but I felt this, right? You're going to just let them continue trucking and not have any issue. You're not going to call it out for the disgusting evil that it is. Even I kind of batted and I was like, oh, that's crazy. But because as somebody who is a minority, when you are literally born into this world, dealing with the horrors that are, and like the depravity of all the opportunity and stuff. So it's not like you really come in with as much like anger as much as you are just like, I understand that this world is just garbage and that it needs to be improved, and there needs to be awareness. So when it comes to this stuff, it wasn't even coming from an angle of anger for me. I was just like, wow, that is a disgusting level of shit to say, but I see how you got there. You put another creed in that place, and it's not you see where you got there. It's called the FBI. What is going on? Keep them from having any jobs or any roles in certain things and so on and so forth, right? You're done as an actor. That would absolutely be the case. If Denzel Washington said the same thing about the opposite party, come on. And then on top of that, we would have more examples to pull from. And yes, there are a lot of black crime that occurs. And most crime is intraracial, which means within its own race. And black on black crime is a thing, but it's something that gets trumped up. But like literally white on white crime is a thing just as much. And it's you just don't, you have a level of forgiveness in your heart, or you don't think that people are willing to do these things. So you there's this 60% of crimes go unsolved. That's a common thing. I think that's the actual statistic. And then on top of that, when it comes to dealing with black criminals, you tend to just get anybody. Like justice is if we got somebody off the street. And then on top of that, there's trumped up things that occur that weren't real. There's throwing the books at things that would have been lighter sentences or just not like a proper sentence. And then there's all these other cases of many different ways where there is definitely that. But I would say over the history, specifically when I'm talking about the period around the civil rights era, between domestic violence, police brutality, and all the predatory companies and factors that were in place, there is way more case studies for the harm and horrors that came from our perspective. And we are so pure that we weren't doing some crazy thing in mass. Yes, they try to make sure that there's this authority over us to quell that. But when you're talking about, if you put yourself in that scenario, you guys would die before you lived another day letting this stuff happen. We are better than you in that sense. And you would say that you're better because you wouldn't do wrong. You wouldn't allow somebody to harm you. That is also the biggest form of hypocrisy, because all that means is that you're saying, stay in your place, boy, but I would never. But why would you ever try to step out of what you're dealing with? I would never do what you're dealing with. No, I would never. I would stop that at the bud. We have militia groups lined up for this reason. Stand by and stand down and stand by, whatever Trump said. Like, this stuff is very much just full on manipulation. I refuse to believe that it's people being that ignorant and in denial. And this is, once again, like the Willie Lynch letters was like a rule brick that was used and continued throughout all of slavery and post-slavery. And it had a plan to kind of keep that same thing going in like a legal setting where we do it to ourselves. You can see the effects of that. And I do feel like there's been like a little rule book about this whole, like, when people are trying to call out this stuff, you kind of do this weird poke and prod thing where you go, oh, you're spreading hate. And I've just said, I have no deep level of emotion. You would have more hate talking about a black person that was selling weed. I have all the hate. And this is whitewashing or trying to like gaslight. But at the end of the day, you cannot be that blind to the thing. So I do think it's a part of like that, like same incestuous plan to keep this stuff going, poke and prod, make them uh, act out of their character so that you can prove that they're invalidated, or so that you have a way to critique them when they're talking about you. Because God forbid, like if this conversation, if I guarantee people are looking for a way that I did something wrong so that they can go, oh, but why would, or but you must have da 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 da, instead of addressing any of the things I will discuss here, because that's the plan, and I do think that that is intentional. So when it comes to like the white agenda and things of that nature, it's not all white people, but the white agenda is something ran by a select number of people to help and support all of the white community, and that white community, specifically that specific subset of conservatives, is very apathetic or rallying around and supportive for the continuation and support of those guys. So yeah, the world will be this. There's a quote: "The world will be destroyed not by those that do wrong, but by those that sit back and watch them." And I do think that when it comes to the apathetic and those who are more progressive, but just kind of are more on the side of protecting their self, like the self-interest or the exclusivity, as long as that exists, we're really not going to be able to do anything to make that change, because they made sure to have the monopoly that they do on the voting, on the political sphere, and so on. So unless they vote for these changes, the People's Party through the Democrats have been sabotaged, and I actually have covered that in a article that I'm going to pop up right here. So because of the People Party being subverted and kind of manipulated in the way that they have been, you aren't going to have a legal means of, or political means of, changing policy in an important enough way where you're going to get that end result that you're seeking. It's either going to be bastardized, manipulated, or just shut down altogether. And when it comes to that same level of like self-righteousness that comes from the white community, you've seen that in the highest form. Like if you don't know what I'm describing when I'm saying like they think they are the only ones that should be like existing and things like that, this goes back to like and this meant the excuse can be Christianity at times, because Christianity decided to just make Jesus white instead of Armenian or whatever his actual nationality was. It's not Armenian, but he, instead of having him be that, they made it all about white figures. So then you could then go, oh, the world was designed for white people. In God's image, purity is for us. Everything is good for us. Everything else is bad. So you saw that from things like the Crusades. You see that with Manifest Destiny. So you see that type of stuff with the Crusades. You have it with Manifest Destiny. You have it with slavery. You have it with global hegemony, and just all these many ways where that ideology of either the white savior or the white is right, there should be no other, is not something that exists in only the extremists. They might not be the ones who want to facilitate and do the actions, but it exists in many more white people than you would think. And on top of that, it's the same thing where they don't have to do anything, because there's a small group of people doing it for them. They just have to play stupid to the people that would seek change and try to invalidate and gaslight them to the point where they can't get there. And then at that point, you keep the system moving. So you are supporting that even if you aren't physically on the ground doing it. But at the end of the day, we're in a world now where the suffrage is spread enough to the middle and the white communities, where once again, much lower bar of suffering. So they're going for the first time, oh no, we're suffering, the government is so corrupt. All the arguments that you would be making, that you would be invalidating from people in a much lower position that were forced in that position, you guys at best did wrong with what you got, because you could have leveraged what you had financially if you were above a certain point. It's one thing to say a poor person can work hard and get out of that situation, but when you actually have disposable income and all these other things, like you could start a company, you can learn how to do this, but between monopolies being formed, which killed all the small businesses, and like farmers used to get the contracts to sell foods in the local communities, and now it's just the Tysons and stuff of the world, like opportunity has been reduced greatly, and it's by those people up top deciding to no longer support the people, because they tricked them into going against their self-interest. So the stuff that we're describing, like the funds, like for all the careers and stuff that are no longer in America because it's all abroad, like these are all actions that came from them. It's not minorities, it's not scarcity, it's the reduction and extraction of the funds the tax base doesn't end up going back to the people, to the infrastructure. Like they are now going and seeing what it's like to start to see the slightest form of what a slum would be or a ghetto would be. But it's literally still an oasis for them compared to what we would be perceiving that as a minority, at least. And they're acting as if they're in our shoes, right? And denying that we have the shoes that we're in. So it's hard to have unity when this level of divide exists. And that's the beauty of their plan, is that they really were able to kind of divide and conquer the lower classes by race and stuff and fear. And that, I mean, I don't know if you really can have the divide bridged at that point. Like Martin Luther King tried to create the People's Party and try to help that cause. He found his way out for that very reason, undoubtedly. And when it comes to the people who have lost their lives because they tried to create unity in that same sabotage thing I described, that is something that I don't see ever changing. And the issue with that is that I am also not going to be doing too much boldly and brazenly either, because awareness is the angle that I'm pursuing. But I do understand that there are people who are very much trying to quell these things. And for the people that do exist that are having issues with me describing all these things and trying to give awareness to the masses, understand that without saying much, you know how much I've redacted based on how much I know. I have a lot more that I know, and I know how to play the game. I'm not going to be just saying everything there is to say, but at the same time, know that I'm not going to be silent either. So I am going to be pushing for change, but in a way that I know the game demands for you to get to the end of the game, right? So I just wanted to say that because, I'm not, this podcast, I wasn't planning on making, and I wasn't even planning on going to this depth. I do feel that it's urgent, and that same urgency is also a little bit of a danger, right? But wait, this is life, and we are here to improve the lives of others and help the lives of others. So if I'm not doing that, I'm not doing my part. And when it comes to like the revisionism side of things, they're like the amount of people that will tell me like, oh, Martin Luther King wouldn't want any positive change or any correction of equality because, hey, every man is created equal, so keep it trucking. Like what? That's the most disgusting, like bastardization of a point and co-opting of a message that I've ever heard. And these are the same people that will take pride in his actions. He did everything right. See, this is what you guys should have been doing. The lies about how he was accepted during his lifetime. He was hated, wanted to be killed. People had this high level of disgust for him. And this is the point that I'm making. People always make the excuse of, oh, you have to be doing things bad to justify having these bad actions happen to you, right? Well, just like me walking or going on a jog, me or an Ahmaud Arbery, you're going to try to make excuses to justify why you are the way you are, or think the way you do, because Martin Luther King is one of the best examples of somebody who has no negative things for you to be critiquing as far as his character or him doing anything wrong in his movements. But in revising and acting like you were supporting and like, oh, yes, he's doing everything right, so he's the example. You guys need to take that lead. You lie about the fact that everybody wanted him dead. The FBI was trying to send S-word letters to try to get him to do things to himself. And then on top of that, they actually did do it to him. But like these are not the truths. You don't want people to be successful. And there's another kind of racist that you don't see as much or acknowledge as much that I interact with a lot, which is, it's one thing to be racist because you think that you look lowly upon another person. There's also the racism of like fear of competition. So like if somebody sees an intelligent black person, a well-spoken black person, or something of that nature, they get very like, I have seen eyes, I've had conversations with those people, and they do not want you as an example. When it comes to like, if like, I've been at events where like girls my age are talking to me and I'm looking and there's a man like in his 40s or something like that, and sometimes several, giving the most hateful eyes, and I mean white girls, giving the most hateful eyes you could ever see. They'll be having conversations because it's also bold. It's very comfortable. So they'll be like, like it's not like they want you to know. And it's specifically because they understand that they can detect if somebody has like a certain level of like, I don't know what it is. Like people, like I've had people interrupt me on the phone to try to like critique me negatively about the fact that I talk well. Like people can see, I guess, grace on your face and come pretty boldly when they see that. But I actually kind of appreciate that in a way because it gives you the actual knowledge and the truth. Because I actually valued studying the past more because people would just outright say it. The documents of like whatever policy would straight up say, we're trying to actually stop this success from occurring. These uppity guys starting to try to get into politics and they're doing too much. If you let them free, or if you let them read, then they'll go away with themselves and be doing things that like it's literally straight up telling the truth. So I value the true, like almost like the Southern racism more than I do like the Northern, where it's more passive and through that pseudo doing that like smiley, like pretending, but everybody knows, wink, wink, nod, nod. So you can actually get real conversations and get some level of like understanding from a perspective of somebody who's willing to just straight up say it. At the end of the day, that doesn't change the fact that the hatred that comes from these people is, it has nothing to do with if you're good or bad. And at the end of the day, the points that they make are invalid always because they'll just move the goalpost forever. Why can't you just be peaceful or whatever? Martin Luther King. Why are you uppity? Why are you there? Go, stop. Like it doesn't matter what you do. You're going to get written off. They're going to find a reason. They try to condemn. The only pointer that they have to condemn him is that he apparently had a lot. He was a womanizer. He had some more than one woman while he was in a relationship, right? This is at the same time where women weren't even able to vote yet. All kinds of horrendous actions were done to women from all politicians and all like forms of like business and just regular men and the people who were complaining. Like you're complaining about cheating. At the end of the day, this is that morality and that goalpost sliding that never can end in any resolution. And it comes more from that like creepy, like that pretending, but like really everybody knows, but you can't call it out because then they just keep running you in that circle. I know how to go above it. It's a game of chess, and you guys are playing checkers with that nonsense. But at the end of the day, like that is something that works in many cases. So you got to call it out and you got to address it. But it's so ridiculous. So when it comes to fear and things of that nature, what they do is they pretty much make it to where like if you are a white person that has quality feelings and is good, whether it's through the propaganda and the news over inflating the issues around whatever is going on in the black community and not ever giving any context or credence to the all the good, like you would think I don't exist listening to the media. There's millions of me. Like it's ridiculous. But at the end of the day, the point is, as long as it's not being called out in a way that you can get around, then you're fine. But I know how to play this game. I've literally been in these circles all my life, and as I said, it's a simple game because you only have one move, so you're not gonna win. Like as long as you keep cool, and as long as you know the facts, I'm talking to you, but I'm really just letting everyone else hear because it makes you the fool, and I'll change the hearts of everyone else. And maybe if I change enough people's hearts who are more apathetic, then they'll be the one to come to you and get you to change. But if you don't, then, heaven has a place for you, or God, at least, for that matter. Another example of the immorality and the lack of truth in the way that the conservative right kind of structures their mindset, like, and this goes for a larger majority, even more than I described before, is if the Bible had all the same scripture, if all the stories were the same and the morality was the same, but Jesus was shown to actually be like a Middle Eastern man that had curly hair and bronze skin, like it very clearly states, there's many, 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 many of these guys that would give up or not be able to stand with him for the religion anymore. And that's the thing that we are constantly critiqued for is, oh, you can't support this because it's not of your creed or it's white, and why you have that distaste or what have you. There's so many reasons why there would be justification for somebody coming off that way, but even ignoring that point, even calling that point wrong, what is your excuse? Because I guarantee, like, all the people that you would be discussing, like, we already believe in a God of a different race. So it's not even like a question. We are able to have that morality proven of, like, it doesn't need to be me. It doesn't need to be in my image. I listen to the scripture and I am in love with the word. You have some stipulations. You needed to feed your ego, and you needed to be this extra thing that you can use to manipulate the masses. And that, if you can't see the dirt in that, if a real, like a true pure-hearted Christian can't see the issue there, I have no understanding how you guys are ever going to get anywhere in the form of morality in any setting, because this is the biggest one. Your own religion, then the people who claim to be the most devout in that religion, you would immediately just you would just probably have denial and just keep saying that it's not that case. But that's the stuff I'm talking about. So coming from the Black perspective again, when it comes to experiencing this realized Holocaust denial, essentially, it really is the masses completely invalidating your point, having complete hatred in their heart for the fact that you're in the situation that you're in, and trying to also sabotage everything that you're doing. So we have risen through all of this. We have lost many because of things like mass incarceration, all the other factors that played into, like, housing and the domestic situations, violence and stuff of that nature, domestic violence, domestic terrorism, and so on. So the fortitude that we have is something that is unbreakable. Whereas if you guys had a similar level of pain and strife that you went through, so if the white Republicans specifically, this is now even broader term, experienced any of the things on the highest or on the lowest form of what we deal with, as far as the stuff I've described before and the things that are going on still, you guys would be in the streets in mass, or you guys would have all just committed in terms of you would not be willing to live like this. The mental health would be so absurdly destroyed for you guys. And I know this personally because I'm somebody who didn't actually experience too many traumas or negative things myself in my life. And because of that, I know that I am not nearly as fortified and ready as the people that I have seen, like, for instance, in the inner city and stuff. If you talk to people that are the most quality of human beings, it's very common that they'll go, yeah, I've seen a murder directly at the age of 7 and things like that. Yeah, it changed me for life. I can't sleep well, this and that. But they still, you wouldn't know if they didn't tell you, and they still have this level of, like, zen. Like I always say, the people who've experienced the worst become the most emotionally developed. And people act like, oh, Black people are just this violent, da 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 da. You learn that you have real times you need to stand your ground, and if you're in an environment that's not safe, then you have to be really ready and trained for that. But in most cases, we are the most able to handle these things and to kind of go about it in the best way when you're discussing those who aren't, like, damaged from the things that we've experienced. So when you're discussing the way that we are and interact in the world, I can't see a world where, or I have yet to hear an argument where somebody can describe to me how the conservative person that I'm referring to is more moral than me, is more cognitively in tune with me, or than me, in terms of, like, being able to see right from wrong and the clarity of the points instead of just lying about points. I don't know any that have less, or have more ability to handle the strife and the hurdles that the Black community has experienced and still be solid on the other end without having a strong intensity of hatred in your heart. You made us these incredibly fortified people that, if given any opportunity, we prove it every time, from sports, from all these other things. Like in music and in every other facet, we are absolutely a force to be reckoned with in terms of being a quality individual. And I'm not saying that there's a hierarchy, because I don't actually put any creed above any other creeds. We're all humans. We all have human nature and have human folly. And certain individuals are better than others in terms of how far along on the scale of human folly they are, or controlling the human folly. But that does not decide a people. And that really is an environmental factor. Because if you're in the right environment, you're set. If you're in a bad environment, you're probably going to have a lot more you work through. But also, if you get to the other side, that pressure makes a diamond that you can't form otherwise. So for the people of the like for the brothers of the diaspora, so to speak, the African Americans from all around the world, whether it be Jamaica, Haiti, Africa, so on and so forth, just like any foreigner, when they come to this land, just like they've seen enough, they've experienced enough, and they've had enough hardship where all they need is an opportunity. And they will be the engineer, they will be the doctor, they will be this, just like any other, and they will put their life to it and guarantee success every single time. And these guys are great at what they do. Now, that's the fair comparison that you can give to the white creed, because that is actually somebody who came voluntarily, knowing what the scenarios were and were ready to deal with it, had the actual assets and ability and freedoms to kind of explore that. But when it comes to like specifically the black creed that was disconnected from our origin, and the difference that I'm describing is that any black person that actually has any ties to their origin, they wouldn't be saying I'm black. They'd say I'm Jamaican, I'm Haitian, I'm so on. If you know your race, you know your race. If you don't, you are more than likely somebody who came from the slave trade, which also means that you've more than likely been here since the 1600s. So when it came to people who got here in the 1800s or later, who immediately put themselves on this higher pedestal of like more being deserving of any rights or privileges, that there should be more done for them than for us, so on and so forth. It is absurd, and it is proof that it would be, when I describe if people could be more honest in their racism, America, if they were willing to, they would be able to go, yes, this was a country built for white people, around white people, to uplift white people, and we did not really want to make that something available for anyone else. So anytime I'm talking about trying to make the world better, and I get told, go back to your country and things like that, and all the other things that you hear, that is proof of them saying, you aren't supposed to be a part of this. I shouldn't have any views of trying to make the nation in my image. I shouldn't be trying to be involved in or experiencing the benefits of this land. And these are people who genuinely just were given a promise, versus us who put in blood, sweat, and tears for 200 years before they even landed, and then put in more blood, sweat, and tears to get what little we did attain after the sabotaging and all that post. Whereas they were riding on the coattails of the building of the middle class, talking about how we pick ourselves up from our bootstraps and trying to reduce any chance of having things like quality schooling, economic equality in the form of like giving proper like housing options and things of that nature. This is the bar that people say is a handout as far as what affirmative action was trying to get done. Look at all the things that were done for them, and then look at all the case studies for people who suffered lesser that received equal or better. I mean, well, way better in terms of like being directly given the funds or means to immediately improve their situation. Yes, we were given all these tools and schools and all that stuff, but they destroyed the places to go. So it's like, what are you doing? Yes, okay, we were actually able to get a property, but you priced out and de facto segregated everything so that we couldn't actually access it. Like it's great marketing. It's legalese to make it look like on paper, yes, the 13th Amendment was actually the end of slavery. So why are you complaining? While really it was so that you could just get the use of slave labor in the form of prisons and things of that nature. So it's the same continuation of all the same variables. So and actually, you know what? I am not going to spend too much time on this because I don't want this video. This is already going to be the longest video yet. So I'm just going to show you another example of some comments that I have posted on a recent thread. So pause if you want to see these, and you'll learn a little bit more about what I'm discussing in this. But the level of layers to this is something that would literally take a college course the length of a year or 6, depending on how much you want to cover each topic. So as I mentioned briefly before, like this is pretty much what the civics class of the future really could be, and the way that we kind of go about educating. And I would even go a little step further so that it's not as polarizing as focusing so long and so focused on any dynamic of hate. What you could do is just make it, we all study whatever local community that we're from, what from the governance, from the businesses and the things that kind of built it up to be what it is, the history of it, and any big accomplishments or downfalls that came in that community. So if you're in Boston, you could learn about X, Y, and Z, obviously like the Salem witch trials and going forward. And then if you're in like Philadelphia, you can learn about X, Y, and Z, the move bombing and forward, so on and so forth. Like Baltimore used to be essentially like one of the financial capitals of America at a time. Like there's a lot of really beneficial things you could learn, and a lot of things that would like give more credence to the perspective of all that's going on around in a full perspective, so that you're not like, okay, and then you guys did this, and then these guys did this, and then there was a big fight, and then nothing got better. Like that's not the angle that I think is productive. But going in from the angle of this is the history, these things were occurring, it got better, and then it started declining, and then because this happened, it made the world a little bit better at a time. And so we need to focus on this and watch out for that, right? This is what a productive school, a productive education would be. But they don't even want you to learn about politics and stuff like that. Like the school, like student body, the school president, things like that. That's for the private schools and the people who they would like to keep that exclusivity exclusive with. So they do kind of keep the lower and to a degree middle class from really being able to get the knowledge and information early enough to compete to the degree where they would even really be in your community, because they really, like the poor whites was like a genre of people that would be marginalized as well. So they would say like no letting poor whites in the community, minorities, so on and so forth, because they were fearing that it would kind of taint the quality of the community, that they would integrate with their kids and so on and so forth. So that perspective is kind of that same extent where like they're going to suppress and so on, and that's why the middle class is dying, and that's why everything's getting consolidated to the top also, as well as just greed in general. And then the last extension that we could even say for the civics class is if we can get to the point where we can work around the limitations that many put around education, then you can get to the point where you're even training people. So you go, okay, what does this local community need? Does it need engineers? Does it need STEM jobs? Does it need politicians who are competent and benevolent? Does it need maintenance and construction people because it's falling apart? And if you just put that stuff out in like a Job Corps, like an online thing where you can educate yourself, you click on whichever thing you're interested in, and it has like a roster or a directory of the things that are needed from order of like most needed to lowest or something like that, you could immediately kind of like fix much of the issues in a city, on a local scale, in a state, in one generation. And you can actually put the right systems in place to have like benevolent, good people that want to make the world better. And on top of that, because we're falling apart in so many ways in education, in like so much as far as like America compared to the world, like we're like 24th or something, like 50th or 45th or something in like testing, like it's bad. I mean, it's because they're trying to keep us from being able to compete. So the way to compete might be to try to just compete on your local side in jobs that they know isn't going to be so economically profitable that you'll be able to kind of get out of the communities that you're in. But you know, if you decide to create a company, then you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, that I think really does cover all that the civics class would need to be, and how you would go about it in a way that would be more productive than it is divisive. And you can explain to me what I'm missing on that, but I really think between covering all the things I discussed and all the points that I just made, that is really all the tools that you would need to fully understand and kind of help your government and your nation. But that depends on if the elites still care about nationalism, and that's the real test. So we're actually going to be covering that in the next episode, as far as how we can make the world a little better and how we can combat some of the contributing factors that made it and are making it the way that it is today. But that's everything that we're covering for today. This is the State of the Union, because the state of our union is seeming bleak, but has all the potential it always has. And we've only evolved slowly, very slowly, if you're looking at the behind the scenes, but we have evolved as a nation, and change is being made, even if it's in like a slower form, trying to kind of combat all this stuff that we're dealing with today. So I just want to let you know there's hope out there, and this is the information that you would need to understand the Black perspective, the white perspective, the minority perspective. So hopefully you walk away with a little more grace or understanding for your fellow American. This is not a war of race. This is a war of good and evil. And as far as that goes, we're fighting the good fight, but we need to do a little bit more in a productive way. The only way to attack what is going on is to not attack, is to be forgiving, is to have understanding, and to try to work together in the face of what's going on. So in doing that, with aware minds, with patience and grace, and being non-biased enough to be able to see even your opposition as the human that they are, we can make the world a better place, and we can put an end to a lot of bad things. But it does take awareness, and it does take an open mind. So if you got to the end of this, you clearly have that, and I can't appreciate you enough from it. So just make sure you hit like, subscribe, and keep up with what's going on next. Follow Damian Riggs Productions to see the reaction videos that I'm going to do on this topic. And otherwise, you can check out my article if you want to learn a lot more. And that is all. So this has been the State of the Union. We're wrapping up on 2024. So get ready for 2025. Let me know what you want to see. And as always, stay curious.